now call the February 14th, 2024 meeting of the Kansas State Board of Education to order. We have 9 board members present today. One is on Zoom. A few are still missing from their seats, but they are in the building and will be here in just a moment. We do have quorum at this time. And it is Dr. Dina Horst's birthday. So we are celebrating Dina today. Happy birthday, Dina.
Happy birthday.
Let's sing again.
Happy birthday to you.
You'll notice I turned the mic off for the singing. Are there any changes to today's agenda? And if not, a motion would be in order to approve it. From Kathy, is there a second? Anybody? Second for Michelle, thank you. All in favor of approving today's agenda, raise your hand. Okay, and Betty, there we go, all right. And well, that'll be an 8-0 vote. Anna's still out of the room. Motion passes. And next, or first up, I should say, we have Bert Moore, the Director of Special Education and Title Services with the SEAC Annual Report. Welcome. Eric will get you.
Now we're on. Okay, thank you for this opportunity, board members, to present our annual report to you. We have Marvin Miller, who was the chair this year, was chair-elect last year, and he's going to give you a brief update. And then in your board packet, you have a copy of our annual report. So if you have any questions, we'd entertain questions too, either along the way or when we conclude. So Marvin Miller.
Good morning. It is good to be here, and thank you, Madam Chair Haas and the rest of the board members for allowing SEAC to spend this time talking about what we have done this year. I also want to thank those of you that are able to make it to our breakfast this morning. It is always a pleasure for us to get to know our board members from across the state. We all want to work together as we move forward in our educational excellence. My name is Marvin Miller. I happen to be the current chair of SEAC, which is the Special Education Annual Advisory Committee, and we're presenting our annual report for 2022-23. I am a parent of a 21-year-old daughter with Down syndrome. I am also employed as a special education teacher in a structured learning classroom in Hayesville at Campus High School. Typically, the past chair normally presents this report, but many of you know Tricia Blackman, and she's already now working for KSDE and doing a great job. Our leadership team this year consists of Jennifer King, our past chair. She is right behind me. And then our chair-elect, Lindsay Groff, who is not able to be here today. For those of you that may not be aware, SEAC is a federally mandated component of the IDEA, which tries to get a wide representation of people from across the state in different capacities, all with the majority of people being parents of children and students with disabilities or someone with a disability themselves. And our mission is to inform and advise you, the state board, of anything that is going on that is concerning special ed so that you can address that. We have a number of ex officios as well that we have grown over the years so we can listen carefully to all the stakeholders' voices and recommend solutions. We are very grateful to Bert Moore and his team for carefully compiling the summer report and presentation that you have in your packets today. It's not my intent to read that entire report, but I do want to highlight some of the activity that we did during the past year. Some of that stuff was done already 18 months ago. We've already done so much more since then. Our work continues to focus on the differentiated monitoring system review and the upcoming OSEP visit that will be happening, I believe, in September. We are excited to have endorsed more licensed pathways for special ed teachers to get into special ed classrooms, and I know you have acted upon that. We have reviewed the new graduation requirements. We've been involved with that since the beginning and are excited for the possibilities that it can yield to some of our students with disabilities. We have submitted PP and APR data and reviewed that way back in January of 2023. We're excited about the individual plan of studies and how that interacts with the IEPs. That's been going on for a while now, and we're starting to see some growth and movement in that area. Um, Again, we have had ESI regulation update, which we have monitored and done more training on and continue to review that. And I'm glad to see that that's moved quite a long ways in the last 10 years. We continue to find more ways to interact with service providers in the next part of our system. We're always looking for a seamless transition from the special education services into the more adult services. We want transition to focus on competitive integrated employment, but we also know that there are some that will need more services along the way, and we do not want to see the investment that this board has put into special education end at 21, as we want to see adult flourishing in all of our students. And finally, we have been proactive in identifying how special education has changed over the last few years, especially since COVID and with the depletion of ESSER's funds. So we have new challenges ahead of us, new students ahead of us, and we are excited to continue finding solutions and bringing ideas to you. This year, we've been busy on identifying concerns as they develop. Some of our concerns that we have moving forward, and we don't have all the answers yet, but we know that we can together work and find a solution. The impact on special education with the open enrollment and open borders is a very large concern, and we are keeping a close eye on that. We want our students to succeed no matter where they go to school. We're concerned about the rapid expansion of virtual programs, especially meeting the needs of students that require specially designed instruction. Are they being met, and how are we able to monitor that and support especially some of our co-ops and interlocals in the field? And another area that we're looking at is developing and continuing to work on developing a statewide IEP system. We are seeing what could be advantages for that. We're carefully listening to stakeholders and making sure we take an account into all the concerns. If this is something we move forward on, we want it to be sustainable over multiple decades. And so we look forward into continue advising the State Board of Education as we move forward together. So thank you for allowing me just a few minutes to bring this report to you. You can read the rest of the details of all the work that we do to advise you in the report. So thank you for your time, and I will welcome any questions that you might have. And if I don't know the answer, I'll turn it over to Bert Moore.
Excellent. We'll start with Jim Porter.
Thank you. I need to point out to the group that Marvin was on the emergency safety intervention. He talked about that some task force years ago. I was the secretary of that group and a very valuable member, and also a member of our transition work group. So that's my questions. I'm related to transition. We made several recommendations. That group made several recommendations. I need to know how we're doing improving transition and what are the barriers that we need to address.
Sure. Thank you, Jim. This is an important issue for me. As I've mentioned earlier, my daughter has Down syndrome, and she aged out of the school system as she hit 21 last year. And so we are facing the realities of whatever happened in transition. Back when I first joined, she was, I think, 10 or 11. And on the transition team, when Jim Porter first put that together, I think she was in 7th and 8th grade, so I thought we had plenty of time. Time goes by quickly, and systems take time to change. I am happy to report that we are moving forward, but not as fast as the pace that I would like. I would like to thank the KU and some of their centers for working on transition a lot in the last few years. I think the transition task force 5 and 6 years ago has got conversation going again. And so we're seeing more transition training, more discussion about transition, looking at transition indicators, and then pulling all the different aspects together, because it's just not it's not just the State Board of Education groups that are involved. We have VR and other systems that have to come together through the different waivers to make this work. As I said, we have developed through a KU grant a couple years ago a transition council with multiple stakeholders in Sedgwick County. And I believe through that grant, there are about 6 other transition councils that are in other population centers of the state. We involved almost, I believe, every school district in our Sedgwick County and larger area, plus city officials, transportation officials, because that's a huge deal for employment, business leaders, trying to get our students into job experiences so that they can use what they've learned in the transition programs, Project Life or Project Search or any other of those type of things to move straight into the workplace, whether it's full-time competitive employment, 10 hours a week competitive employment, or some variation of that with different braided funding from different sources. So we are moving ahead in that. I was excited when I found that KSDE was awarded a $8.4 million grant. I think we saw that a few months ago. I'm looking forward to how that's going to be utilized. I know the intent is to take some of those transition councils that are local and build a statewide system to link all those things together, and then to start to seamlessly transition between the different agencies in the state government so our families just don't fall off the cliff. So I'm excited that the state board has led that conversation over the last 5 or 6 years. I'm excited to see where it's going. We aren't there yet, but I do think that vision will come about in the next few years, so thanks for starting that conversation.
Yeah, and one other question, if I may. You talked about your daughter aging out. It doesn't matter how good our transition plan is if whenever we get to the end, they drop off that cliff.
Correct.
You were talking about. So I know this is not directly our responsibility, but what's best for every kid is our responsibility.
Yes.
So what are the barriers? What do you expect? You don't need to get real personal, but what do you expect of your daughter, and what are the barriers, and how long do you think you're going to have to wait before she gets services that she needs?
As some of you are aware of how the IDD waivers work, you get on a wait list, and the state is actively working on trying to fund some more positions on the wait list. We are at 10 years and 3 months since we got on that wait list. When we got on 10 years ago, the list was about 5 or 6 years long, so we thought we had plenty of time for her to finish her transition program. Would move into a day program, continue VR services, job coaching services. She could have friends, be involved with life, move towards flourishing, get some employment, whether it's part-time, continue volunteering at the rescue mission like she had done before. But that didn't happen, and unfortunately the cost to private pay for day programs are way too unaffordable for my family, much less many other families. We're talking several $1,000s a month. Right now we pay over $1,000 in caregiver costs, which is more than the SSI checks that she receives. So those are huge barriers, especially for families that are struggling already financially. I think some of the things that we continue to look at is working with the Department of Commerce, trying to remind employees that it is to their economic advantage to work with some of our students who we have invested in training and who will be hard, dependable workers and will work for you for a long time. So we're continuing to working on that. And like I said, the big deal is some of the other state funding of the other agencies. We want to take what the state has already invested into our students and to let them, like I said, flourish in the community. So there's still a lot of interaction between the different agencies, and a lot of them are starting to see that, starting to come together. But like I said, we've got a long ways to go. My daughter may find funding the next year, but we've still got others that are a long way on the wait list.
Probably hundreds or thousands.
Sure. There's about 5,400 on the wait list right now.
And just to emphasize, we have to continue to look at what people's abilities are, not just what their disabilities are, because virtually everybody has some abilities, and that's what the transition process needs to be. I know I'm preaching to the choir.
Exactly. As someone who teaches that age group, everyone has abilities, and then there's also value beyond just one's ability. There's the value in being a human image that can give love and comfort to other humans. And we do a good job of showing compassion, I think, in the state as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Marvin.
Jim McNeese.
Well, thank you, Marvin and Brett, for the update. If you could give us, the board, an update on ESI, We haven't talked about that in a long time, and we're supposed to, I believe, get reports on that each year. And it's a timely, and that's emergency situation and intervention. Just give us an update on that.
I'll give a quick update. I haven't seen the
You might
latest.
tell them what ESI is.
Yeah, ESI is Emergency Safety Interventions. When we first looked at this, I think it came up probably 12 years ago already. And this was where students were being secluded in rooms, long restraints without any follow-up to parents at times. And so is it really a change of practice and pedagogy, and how are we going to address students with significant behaviors? I ended up into a classroom where some of those type of things would happen more, and I moved into that part of my career because I was on the ESI task force, because I want to see what we can do. And we saw a lot of positive change in those years, and I think we are continuing to going on positive change. I'll have to ask Bert more to give us some more numbers if they have them, or to present that report at another time, because I don't have the updated numbers. I do know, while we're always concerned that there are numbers, we have seen the numbers significantly lower, and new approaches and new training and de-escalation, and then just a notification of parents, and working together with the different stakeholders and providers that are all involved with some of the students. So our numbers have gone down. I'm not saying there still isn't situations that are out there. I know TASN, I believe, and some of our technical assistant networks do go ahead and review that every year, go into those schools which they'll flag to make sure that they don't need more training, or to find out exactly what it is. So I am comfortable in saying that we have moved very, very far in the last 10 years. And I'm still open to hearing any parent that has an issue with that, because we want to resolve that. Bert, do you have anything more you want to say on that?
We just put that data together, and we can get that to the board. So we'll send that out to you. Trish Backman just provided that report on ESI to the administrators during our special ed webinar last Friday, and it was quite a presentation. She has all the data. She has the restraints, the seclusions, how long they lasted, the average length. So we'll get that to you, Jim. I'm glad you brought that up, but we do need to get that to the state board. So we do have that data, and we'll get it to you.
And if I'm not, I think I'm correct that there has to be in the beginning of each school year some effort or with the professional educators on what ESI is and the rules. And
Yes, and I think what we're finding is that some administrators, gen ed administrators in particular, need some additional training, and some of our special educators. And with as many subs as we have working in classrooms, it makes it difficult to find that consistent approach to how you deal with behavior, how you de-escalate instead of be the trigger to escalate. And then what are the alternatives to having to do an actual restraint or seclude a student? Because now we're much more, what shall I say, it's apparent that if I take you by the arm, was that a restraint? And under the new rules, it probably is. So how are you documenting it? So you may see that the numbers are reflecting that, but that comes into the amount of time the restraint actually occurred, or the seclusion. Many systems have done away with their seclusion rooms because they know that that's not the best way to work with students. So we'll get you that data report.
Jim, I might also, because I know this is something that all the board thinks about. So obviously we got to where we are in 2024 because there were at least some isolated incidents of young people being secluded or restrained, no parent knowledge, and inappropriate. I think all of us would agree. I think what the state board now hears more of from are parents that don't like some of the protocol, or at least the manner of which the protocol is being carried out relative to general ed students around that. And I just think one of the things I think Marvin may want to wrestle with is, do we need better training for gen eds? I think Bert and I have talked about that quite a bit. And then what do we need to do to make sure we're supporting all the students so that special needs kids that are emotionally disturbed and having issues certainly are treated appropriately? And then how do we make sure that schools and classrooms aren't disrupted for a large amount of time because of that. Because I know that's what they're hearing about now. It just, again, as I talked to the board yesterday, when you go attack one problem, sometimes it creates others and that you didn't foresee. And I think it's one of the things SEAC could work
Great
with.
point. And another thing we're working on, I feel, in the field is we have so many students suffering from mental health concerns and trauma. And so they show that through their behavior at school and sometimes through the acting out. And we have to get them the services that they need. I know under the ESSER plan, we had over 150 social workers, counselors, school psychologists added. There will be a cliff when the ESSER funds are gone. And so I'm just concerned about that, and we're going to have to deal with that as well. But at the same time, for ESI, it's all about relationships with families, relationships with students, and relationships with staff. And when we have the relationship strong, then we manage to solve the problem. And when we don't, problems continue. So thank you, Jim, for bringing that up.
I don't see any more questions at this time. Give board members one last chance. Check Betty. Okay. Thank you for the report. And the printed report is in the board packet. It's about 25 pages long.
Yes,
I love that at the end of it, there's a list of abbreviations.
it's about 10 pages long.
And thank you for hosting the board this morning. It was nice to have that conversation with SEAC and be able to start to dig into some of these topics. The table tents were also very nice to kind of keep the conversation going. So thank you for
Well,
doing that.
thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah. And as the commissioner comes up for our next item, which I believe is item 3 on the agenda today, I want to acknowledge that Emma is here and in her seat. And also, we have 2 superintendents, I heard, in the back of the room. I can't see them. Give us a wave. There they are. Thank you so much for being here. Good morning. And welcome, Commissioner.
Well, this is a little different, right? You're hearing from me a lot. I want to thank all of you. This is a topic that has been coming up in each of your districts, and I want to go over with you some research that our agencies conducted around a 4-day school week. As you know, in the Midwest, maybe across the country, but certainly in Missouri, it's been a hot topic as several large districts have actually gone to a 4-day week. So our research team has done some research that I'm going to share with you. Haley Stonloggy is here today and for 2 reasons. A, to run up and tackle me if I say anything wrong around the research. And then B, if you have questions specifically about methodology, she can certainly explain that better than I, and I appreciate her and the team that put this together. I want to cover this in 3 different chunks. First, to tell you the history. How did we arrive at the system that we have in place currently and why we arrived at that, what the purpose was, kind of again talking about ESI. You know, we put a system in place and is it having the intended consequences? Prior to 1992, some of you will remember we had a very different school finance formula than the one we have today. And if you were in what at that time were called the 4th category classification of cities and school districts, your local mill levy was well over 100 mills. I was in one of those in McPherson. And the Supreme Court held in that court case that we needed to equalize education. And I'll just give you the short history. Hugoton had 5 mills at the time because of mostly natural gas. And they were going to leave and go to Oklahoma or Texas because we were going to take money and equalize it across the state. So the wealthy districts weren't very happy, and the poor districts like Galena were very happy, but that occurred in 1992. The legislature, working with the Kansas superintendents, there was an emphasis at the time, I want you to again think about the time, we should have more school, and we should have more staff development. Both of those were very prevalent, and so in the formula, the formula said that currently there were 180 days of school, and you must go to school 6 hours a day. That was the law when the 92 law came in effect. And the legislature and again, in conjunction with the Kansas superintendent, said, we're going to go to 186. We're going to increase that by 6. And some of that's going to be staff development, but we want to lengthen the amount of time that kids learn. There was a big national report called Prisoners of Time that talked about we ought to be going to school longer. Dino will remember this, right? And so I want you to know that. So there were no option for hours at that time. You had to go 180 days, 6 hours a day. Superintendent said, could we have an hour option as we scale this? So what happened over the next several years, as you can see, is that the number of days slowly went up from 1992 to 1995 to 186, and the option for hours were put in. And that's where we get the 1,116 hours today, or school district can go 186 6-hour days. In 1995, in the 1992 to 1995, every school district were going 180 days, 6-hour days. Today, there's 0. Every school district is using the 1,116 hours. So that has shifted in the 30 years that the law went into effect. Superintendents in the 90s said, we have to have this option because Kansas weather is just nuts. And like this year, right? January was crazy cold, snowy, and icy, and February so far has been crazy warm, right? Which is good. So a lot of school districts this year missed quite a bit of school in January, or a pipe would burst, or something would, maybe you want to take a parade day, I don't know, but they wanted some flexibility. And the legislature said, yes, superintendents, we're going to give you local flexibility so that when there is a reason, you don't have to make up the entire day, you have some hour flexibility. And so the law says you can use either. Every school district today uses the 1,116 hours. Now seniors by law go a little bit less, and I'm not going to get into all that, but I wanted you to understand what the law was, and the purpose was to give local flexibility in them. I'm calling them emergency situations that you didn't have to make up the entire day. All right, so that's the first thing. Second thing I want to talk to you about is, what is the evidenced research? We talked about at-risk yesterday. We talked about the science of reading. What's the evidence of research around learning? Just around learning in general. So the first question that researchers have been asking a long time is learning best acquired by mass learning? Meaning I go to any training session and I go for a long period of time, hours or days, and then I may not go back, or if I do, it's years later. Or should I distribute that in shorter learning sessions and spread it out over time? So, and this is true whether you're learning a skill like skiing, or you're learning a skill like a foreign language, or you're learning to read. The research is so I'll just use skiing as an example. If none of us knew how to snow ski and we were going to learn, the question researchers ask is, should we go to Vail, buy a ticket, and ski for 8 hours today, and then not come back for 30 days, and then ski another 8 hours? Or would it be better for us to ski 2 hours today, and 2 hours tomorrow, and 2 hours for 4 days, equivalent of 8 hours? And the research is very clear on mass versus distributed practice. There's 5 meta-analysis. Meta-analysis looks at multiple research studies, and then they combine them. So there are 510 studies on which is best, how to learn. Almost 170,000 students. The effect size, you can see the mean effect. I'm going to give you a quote from someone in education that people follow a lot, which is John Hattie. Hattie says, a number of such desirable difficulties have been identified, but one of the oldest and most reliable surrounds distributive practice. It dates back to the late 1800s. And there's no research study that says if you want to learn something, you should cram it into a short period of time and then not come back to it. You should distribute that over a long period of time. And the younger the learner, the more that distribution should be. And he says that, in short, distributing exposure to information benefits learning. And every study shows that. This is important because if you're going to design then a learning system, you want to design that system so that you have the most impact on learning. Ask a good band director whether they want to meet in a block schedule for 2 hours and skip days, or they want to have a 50-minute schedule every day. And every one of them, I bet, will tell you they want to see the student 50 minutes every day. And they would be right from a retention of learning standpoint. Now, if you're simply learning to take a test, right, and then move on and never use that again, that's different. So mass versus distributed. Does learning time lead to improved student success? Meaning, if I do more time, does that lead to more success? Both research and practice indicate that adding time to a school year can have a meaningful positive impact on a student's proficiency and indeed upon a child's entire education experience. Malcolm Gladwell made a fortune off a book that's maybe not exactly correct, called 10,000 Hours, because it said, if you do something 10,000 hours, you get really, really good at it. I think a lot of people misused that, went out and said, okay, if I just practice 10,000 hours, I'm going to be Tiger Woods or I'm going to be Mozart. But what we see are people at their field spend a great deal of time practicing that. So we know that research is clear that spreading learning out over smaller chunks over time works, and more of those chunks would work. So then let's look at ours situation, okay? So that's just the research in general. Over the time that our researchers looked at that, they went back to 2011, so they could have gone back further, 2011. At that time, there were 40 buildings, not school districts. I don't want you to confuse that with districts. And you can see last year, there were 77 buildings that went 4 days of school a week. And you can see that increased by 16. And I think all of you in every one of your districts, with maybe the exception of Melanie and Michelle, because your school districts, you have school districts looking at going to a 4-day-a-week next year. I mean, they're having that discussion. So you can see what's happened on the right chart. When 16 districts did that a year ago, we started to look at why are people accelerating this? Because you could see, well, there were 5 or 1, and these were all small districts. In the early days, and the ones that have been doing it the longest, they would have told you, we did this to save money. We would shut down school on a Friday or a Monday, and we would save money. And I think you even heard from one of those that's been doing it a long time, Kathy. And what I think most found out is the savings is minimal, if it even at all, because there's other factors into it. But that's the number of districts right now. The current state, so our researchers looked at elementary, middle, junior high, or high school, public and private. They had to have students enrolled in the building, and they must take a state assessment data so we could compare something. So if they were like a K-1 building, then that was going to be excluded from our research. So again, you'll have this. We'll distribute this. So here's the proportion of buildings 4 and 5 day. And you can see that there's a number of high school, 46, there's elementary, 46, but compared to 5 day, there's a significantly more 4 day a week in the rural small schools, and we'll talk about that. By size, no surprise, right? Where are the 4 day a week? Mostly small, mostly very small. The largest right now would be Baxter Springs in southeast Kansas, which went to a 4 day week last year. But that is not true in Missouri, where Independence, Missouri, which is a fairly large school district, went to a 4 day week. So I only point that out. You don't have to look very far to see that it could go larger, even though most of our large districts currently are not having conversations around it. That's the size, that's how many students are in the building. 93% of the buildings have 157 students or less in them. So then we look at how these are categorized by the federal categories of schools. And you can see all of the small schools are in what's called rural distant, I mean there's distance between them, or rural remote, which it means they're even further out. That's where all the 4-day schools are classified right now. And so you don't have any, there's the city on the far left, there's zero. There's zero in the midsize, there's zero in the suburbs, as you can see. So let's now take a look at so a 4-day-a-week in Kansas school goes more minutes a day. You see that on the left? They average 452 minutes a day. And if I'm going 5 days a week, I average 406 minutes a day. So the 4-day-a-week schools in Kansas, I can't speak to Montana because they may do it different, but in Kansas, they go to school a longer school day. But by the end of the week, the 5-day-a-week schools are going more minutes than the 4-day-a-week schools, and that's what this chart shows you. So by the end of the week, the 5-day are going 2,031 minutes of school, and the 4-day-a-week are averaging 1,810 minutes. So that's what this research says, that's the average, and the weekly instruction then inverts. I say that because, at least initially, if we go back to the research on learning, should I spend more time in a day with a first grader, or should I spend more days in a week? Well, the research since the 1800s would say we should probably go to school 6 days a week and even go shorter. If you're just thinking about learning, strictly thinking about learning, and you should probably go to school longer, but you can see it invert. What happens in Kansas is that the 4-day-a-week schools in Kansas currently, and this may change, do not lengthen. They simply add minutes to a given day so they can shorten that week. That's the methodology that they use. So here's the characteristics. So our researchers said, well, if we're going to compare 4-day and 5-day-a-week buildings, there's some things that we have to look at. We're going to look, certainly small school size under 200, high schools rural remote, and we see significant differences in the total daily minutes of instruction. We have to compare apples to apples. We can't compare a 4-day-a-week school to Shawnee Mission because there are no 4-day-a-week schools that are the size of Shawnee Missions. I mean, you have to compare rural schools going 5 days a week to rural schools going 4-day a week, or you don't have an apples to apples comparison in our state. And I say this all the time, if this is really true, Kathy, when I go out, to Western Kansas, people are so grateful that you would come out, and they always say, we're different in Western Kansas. And what I have found is what's really different is rural is very different than suburban, and suburban is very different than urban. But if I'm rural and Jim in Southeast Kansas, I'm a lot like rural in Western Kansas. The ground may look a little different, but the operations and the kids that are served are pretty similar. So again, the advanced analysis our researchers looked at, again, I want to focus on the second item first. To examine comparable groups, our researchers looked at the analysis by looking closely at rural buildings and districts so that we could compare the 4-day to the 5-day of like type of schools. And so when we're comparing rural, this is key because we're not comparing all. Does everyone understand? We're not comparing all because, again, there's no comparison with Shawnee Mission. We don't have a comparison group. So we're comparing rural school districts and buildings using 4-day versus 5. And here's the questions we ask. Are there significant difference in the average years of teaching experience? Do they get, the average age or average years of experience? Are there significant difference in the percent of novice teachers in their first year? Are there significant difference in student performance on state assessments? And is there significant differences in student performance on the ACT? So those are the questions our researchers we're looking to answer by studying this research. So let's talk about teachers. On average, 5-day buildings have teachers with more years working in the school district, but it's not statistically significant. It's slightly larger, as you can see, but our researchers say when you really do the analysis, it's not statistically different between a 4 or 5-day. Second question, novice teachers. Teachers with less than 3 years experience in the district. On average, 4-day buildings have a higher percentage of novice teachers that is statistically significant versus 5-day of similar type student populations. So that's just what we found. They have more new teachers than 5-day. Don't know why. I think Haley, when we get to the end, I think Haley wants me to say many times, we're just citing what we found. There's lots of things you'll ask, and we say we don't know. We don't know the reason for that, right? We just know that's what we found, that there are more novice teachers in the 4-day. So, and by the way, when I talk to superintendents, and I talk to two Monday that are considering going to a 4-day week, and I always ask the question, why? Because in an earlier time, and it was, we're going to save money. And no one, it is, teachers have asked us to look at it. They want to go to, they want to negotiate that. That's generally what I hear. Teachers are asking us to do that. So I just want you to know that's generally what we're hearing around why districts are looking at it. Maybe it makes it easier to retain or recruit teachers. So the second question, is the average performance of students different of 4-day and 5-day buildings? So let's first look at state assessments. So Haley and the researchers looked at 4 areas. First of all, the combined percent in math, science, and ELA in levels 3 and 4. So just take them all, combine them. You can see that in the accountability report. Then they said, well, let's break it down. Let's look at ELA, let's look at math, let's look at science separately. Does that make sense? Looked at a combined score. So they looked at state assessment. Then they looked at ACT, and they looked at the same analysis in the same way. They looked at the composite score, English score, reading score, math score, science score. So in this case, they're looking at state assessments and ACT, and then they're breaking it down into those categories. So I'm just going to walk you through what the findings were there. And then, I should say this, then they looked at, and you're going to see these words. So here are the definitions that you'll want to know. When they say something is significant to a researcher, that's at the 0.05 level of significance, very significant at the 0.01, and highly significant 0.001. The more you get toward the 0.001, the greater that impact of that, of what they looked at, is the best way to put it. All right, state assessments. The left are 4-day-a-week schools, the right, the green, are 5-day-a-week schools. So researchers looked at rural school districts on combined scores, ELA scores, math scores, science scores, and they found 5-day schools are performing slightly better on average than 4-day schools. Now, Dina, you're going to say, I know a school that's doing really well. This is the average. Or I know a 5-day-a-week school is not doing very well. Yes. All right, we're talking about the average. Doesn't mean there's not the end of 1 or 2, because I was at a 4-day-a-week school giving them honors in Kathy's district. Okay, so that I've been at 5-day-a-week schools just recently and gave them honors, right? And so I just want you to know again that we're looking at all of those. So the last bullet, these mean differences are not statistically significant due to the small size of the 4-day schools, meaning the number in total. Our researchers thought the greater number, that significance may have been statistically significant. We don't know because the n size is small. So you see that graph is really small, so it looks like it's a really big gain. But they're saying 5-day-a-week schools do outperform, but not statistically significant. All right, let's look at ACT. All right, we're going to look at composite, and then we'll look at all the breakdown. 5-day-a-week schools perform much better on the ACT than 4-day-a-week schools, and our researchers say this difference is very significantly, statistically significant. There's the composite difference, and here's the breakdown by subcategory. All right, so state assessments slightly but not statistically different. ACT, our researchers will say quite a bit, and it is statistically different. So then, of course, any researcher then, you always jump. I always read the abstract and I jump to the end. Researchers hate that because they spend a lot of time on the methodology. Haley's going, hey, Randy, there's 100 slides in this deck I gave you. Where's all the methodology? And I cut it out, okay? But we have it because true researchers like to see what the methodology was. But the key findings, on average, rural 4-day buildings have significantly more novice teachers and teachers with fewer years experience. That's what we found. There's more novice teachers, significantly more. On academic performance, in general, rural 5-day schools are performing better than 4, but not statistically significant on state assessments. Rural 5-day schools are performing significantly better in all areas of the ACT. So more novice teachers, small difference, but not statistically significant on state assessments, fairly large difference on ACT. And then the mechanisms of how this works are very unclear, because within any school, there are other variables going on, whether you're going 4 days a week or whether you're going 5 days a week. Do they have a good reading program? Do they, are the teachers well, I mean, you could go on, and what our researchers are saying is we'd have to look at the causes for this. We're not telling you the causes, we're just telling you what it looks like. So I always ask the question when I get called about a 4-day week. So the state of Kansas, I usually preface it this way, gives you money to impact the success of students. Tell me how going to a 4-day a week will enhance that. And the answer generally is, well, I think I can get more teachers that want to work for me and I can keep more teachers. That doesn't seem to be true in the 4-day week versus the 5 currently, but it may be in the future. I always say, unless everyone around you goes to a 4-day week and then you have no more advantage, right? I mean, if the advantage is they'll come to me because it's 4-day. We can't find any research that says 4-day a week is a better model than a 5. Well, it may be in some cases not worse. We can't find any that says it's a better model. We were talking yesterday just informally about year-round schools. That was a topic in the early 1990s in Kansas. And when you say year-round schools, everyone, I think, believes we're going 360 days a year. And that's not what a year-round school, instead of taking 2.5 months in the summer, you would take, like we do Christmas, you take a week at Labor Day and a week at, maybe at Memorial Day, a week at the 4th of July. And so you go all year round, but you have more breaks and you have them spread out. From a learning standpoint, that's an outstanding model. Now, we've never done that because of our agrarian roots. I mean, that's why we have the schedule we are, is because so that kids can go harvest. And that's true. Whether or not we need to do that today, it should be a question. But from a learning standpoint, again, taking shorter breaks and coming back versus a longer break helps retain learning. And that's why your sport teams or your debate teams, your FFA kids that we saw yesterday, they're practicing on those days you're out. The other thing I want to say about our 4-day week, if our 4-day a week schools were going longer, you would negate, I think, those effects that we're talking about, longer school year. But currently our 4-day a week schools do not do that. They add more minutes to the day, and they've shortened the amount of days then per week or per year that they go to school. All right, Haley's here to support me. She didn't tackle me once. I saw her leg twitching several times though, and I will be happy try to answer questions about the findings.
Start with Kathy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Randy knows, I've been digging into this since he said he was going to do a discussion on it. And he gave me a report on the districts that are doing the 4-day models. We have 29 of them from what I'm gathering out of this, 15 of them being in District 5, so just over half. And I had many superintendents respond to my, just give me some feedback, give me your experience, pros and cons. And it was really nice and refreshing to see they pretty much all could say, yes, we have pros and cons. I don't know any district who doesn't, no matter how many minutes and days they're going. So, but I will tell you, the ones that are out there in the rural, like Syracuse, I mean, they're the only school in the county, they've got a lot of road to cover. So, you know, there's definitely serious pros for them. And that's 20 years they've been doing that. So, you know, it's a huge thing once a community, but that's the thing. Does it work for your community and your parents? And is it something everybody's stepping into? So, you know, certainly not the idea everybody should just rush to this. Absolutely not, because I think there are some that it might not be working for. But it's that individual situation, and is this working for us and our families? And I did go through this. I had the thought, so I went through this with the awards. 19 out of these 29 have received an award out of the agency. So they must be doing something right all at the same time. So while I can certainly appreciate, and I know they would appreciate, all of the statistics, there are many of them that are seeing benefits, and that if they are seeing a financial savings, they're pouring it right back into their professional development and hearing a lot of good out of their teachers' mental health and their teachers being able to be fresh and have that time that they need to truly plan and do projects. And, you know, so I heard a lot of benefit that they're seeing in their districts. And again, I think it's such an individual community decision, and you need the community behind you. Like, it needs to be an absolute working together as much as possible with everybody. But I mean, it was interesting because I certainly did not realize we had districts that were 14 years, 20 years, you know, and 9 years. I mean, there's a lot of time. So to me, there's a little bit of proof there to say over that much time, it's not a huge, huge difference in those state assessment returns, you know. So I just was really thrilled to just get the feedback. There are definitely a couple who would flip back in a minute, you know, because we've got new superintendents coming and going, so they're not feeling it so much. But then I've also heard from them that have been in the 5A, 6A schools, and they just recognize that this just works here. Everybody's behind it, they're working it together. So again, you know, it's been quite the learning process in the midst of it, and just getting and hopefully nobody's having a heart attack out there. Like, it's a discussion. We're just having a conversation.
That's right. I
Just
got a lot of
having a
phone calls too,
I know.
because I
It's
know some of you do.
I'm not trying to upset anybody, just want to hear your feedback. What is your experience going on? And again, all of them could come back with pros and cons. We definitely see pros and cons, but at this point, we see more pro than con, and you know, it's very steeped into the community after 20 years. Okay, it works for them. When they have to travel 2 hours anywhere for anything, not just activities, to go to the doctor, to go out to a major grocery store, like, it's a big deal to have that day for the family to do that. So one of them even put out there, this is a social emotional thing for them. Like, they see healthier kids and teachers on that level as much as anything. So obviously they're seeing some huge pros, and it's working for them. So I think that's a beautiful thing. And it was fun to dig into it and to really understand what's going on and have this discussion and hear from the statistical side of it what we're seeing at the same time. But I love the idea, and I hope that if people are thinking, and I know there are more districts thinking about it, that they are really engaging with their communities and their parents and answering that question. Why would you do that? How is it going to enhance what you've got going on? Some of them feel like it's saved their districts, that they've been able to have a school longer, that it's kept them. So I think that's a huge piece when you're talking very rural Kansas. So I want to thank all of the ones who have responded to me and given me their feedback. And I mean, obviously, I'm very much about local control, and I hope if we can prove that they're maintaining, then I think that's the huge piece. So as long as that's working, and it's academically. And I asked the questions, how are you seeing this with your little ones? So I had a couple of board members reach out, when they heard from their superintendent, and they have those little ones. And they said, it's working for us because they have that 3-day weekend, so they're able to see it. They're seeing a benefit in it. So, I mean, if it works, what do you do, right? So I think it's beautiful, and I'm glad we've got the hours that they can work with. One of them also said, when we have a snow day, well, then we just automatically go the day we wouldn't have gone. So it's an immediate build back in. It doesn't lengthen their school year because they can immediately take the day they usually aren't in, and they just go to school that day and make up for it. So they see a lot of pros in the midst of it. So I think that's cool that they can do that. So thank you for all of this. I appreciate it.
Ann?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So they still have the 1,116 hours to meet, right?
Correct.
So if the average is 200 minutes less a week, wouldn't they have to go more weeks on the whole?
Well, they have to go 1,116, yeah.
Whatever
hours.
that takes. Yeah, I'm not as concerned about the 4-day week. Most of what I read is it's a recruiting tool, particularly along the border, because they have it in other states and they feel like they can recruit better with a 4-day week. That's just a discussion I hear, which may be why they have more new teachers, because younger people find it, attractive for their lifestyle and stuff. But I'm more worried about having so many schools, districts with 100 kids, and what those kids are not getting than the 4-day week, which I wish the legislature would continue to look at. But I get the politics of, combining districts, so we'll let them struggle with that. Thank you.
And Betty?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is not trying to put any kind of value one way or the other, just out of curiosity. I know that over the course of summer, we come back and we deal with the factors such as learning loss. Was that is that some kind of way integrated into any of the studies? That's the first part. The second part that I'm wondering if it's integrated would have to do with the at-risk students in terms of how they are performing. Is there anything that would indicate an impact or on that? And it's more just curiosity that things have popped into my mind.
So our researchers did not look at the summer learning loss because that would have been somewhat the same for both the 4 and the 5-day school. I think there's been lots of national studies, Betty, I think know it, and you're well aware of this, having sat on the local board in Wichita, that that at-risk kids lose a lot over that large of a break. But our researchers didn't look at that. They did not share with me any subgroup analysis. And so Haley's saying, no, they did not look at that. That could be something to look at further, like is there a difference between what we see like on free and reduced lunch students or, other demographics? We did not look at that. So we could though.
And one other thing that I'm just
We'll
also
prob-
kind
oh,
of curious.
Yeah, I'm saying we probably can't look at that because our N size would be so small. It would start to identify, kids by name. And so we may not be able to do that because these schools are so small to start with, that if we do that, that our sample size may be so small we couldn't run that analysis. That's what Haley's trying to get my attention to say. So.
I know there are a lot of factors that are involved in that. And then the other thing that I really had kind of wondered when you were talking about minimal difference, not significant, but at what point, as an example, if we take a mere insignificant number over a period of time, where does that kind of catch up and tilt? So it's just some other things that come to mind. Again, neither dismissing the idea or going wholehearted for the idea. Those are just things that kind of come to my mind that if this takes root and a lot of school districts start to look at it. Um, Bigger school districts looking at that, to have available the kind of information that would impact education, particularly for at-risk students. That's all. Thank you.
I saw Randy look at the clock. I'm going to remind the board members, this is your time. So I will keep, because it's Wednesday, I will keep calling names. And Jim, I see your finger up, so I can put you at the bottom of the list. Danny? Danny points at Jim. Jim?
Oh, thank you, Danny. Oh, nice. As a former administrator who did a lot of master class scheduling and scheduling variations, it's the training and the commitment of the staff that makes any schedule work. And this is just a variation on schedules. 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, 5 days. You know, you have the time to work with. How are they supporting the teachers and the students as they transition to a non-traditional? And it's a non-traditional, schedule. Some teachers adapt really well, but others bring in the way they used to do it and just keep doing it longer, and that's not the way to do it. There's also a seat time part on the students when they're in a longer class period. Just because you got more time doesn't mean you're going to be a better teacher. There's so many issues that are involved in this that a lot of times people don't see until they're into it. It's like a home improvement project, and you find out that behind that wall there's more stuff. So I've talked to districts and teachers and principals about different kinds of schedules, and the commitment to it and the support of it and the training for it is what's really vital. Because 90 minutes is no better if you're not a good teacher already. And I will tell you this, longer class periods are more tired teachers. I've given presentations on this stuff, There's no magic wand. Great teachers can take 10 minutes and do way better than somebody who's not a good teacher and has 90 minutes.
Right. Those are the factors, of course,
Yeah.
that are all
It's
the
not the
variables
time,
within
it's
any
the
school.
person who's organizing, running, and managing that classroom.
One of the things too, that if you run a high school, you know this. So I'm going to give you the most common schedule in a Kansas high school. It's not the only, we have lots, is a 7-period, about a 52, 53-minute period. Now there are block schedules, there's all kinds, but that's the most common. If you add 30 minutes to a day to that high school, you're adding about 4 minutes to that class. So the question is, I gotta go 4 days a week or 5. That's where your band people or your performance people start to, hey, I can't get that 4 minutes doesn't equate to coming back and getting 53 more minutes. But because Jim, your point's well taken. If I change my schedule, maybe it would work better, right? But when you just say, I'm gonna keep what I have and I'm gonna do this, then it tends not to work. So I'm gonna teach the way I've always taught in a 53-minute block, and we're going to 90-minute blocks. And so I'm just gonna double the kids are, that isn't gonna work. And so if you're going to change schedule, you have to change methodologies. I think that's what Jim's
If you were
saying.
boring at 45 minutes as a lecturer, I can't see you at 90.
I know, exactly right.
It does change. It changes the instructional design of the classroom. And for good teachers, that works out really well.
Danny?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the 4-minute thing, that goes way back too, because in snow days, they add 4 minutes to each hour, and I always ask, how does that help the kids? And so that is my personal concern,
Hey,
but
Danny,
also,
that discussion's going to be happening
I know.
tomorrow in Wyandotte and Johnson County over going to the parade.
Yep.
How are we going to make up the time to get to 11:16? Someone's going to say we ought to go to school all the day, and someone's going to say we ought to add minutes to the day. I'm just saying that will be the discussion,
Yeah.
exactly what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
And then the feedback that I've been getting from the bigger school districts is the grade school, middle school is one thing, to maybe not 4 days, but high school is a whole different thing. So that's and that's more than one larger school district. People have said those things to me.
Yeah.
Kathy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things Ann brought it up, and I meant to say it, was talking about the novice teachers are more in the 4-day. I mean, the question could be asked, is that a better learning environment for a novice teacher to be in a smaller school? I mean, who knows, right? Just a thought I had. But one thing I wanted to point out that I had done is from the report Dr. Watson gave me, was like this, at this point, from what I'm seeing, total 6,000 kids affected by the 4-day. That's what I got from what you sent me. So I was like, that's a pretty small number compared to the overall state. So at this point, it's not a lot of kids being
Right.
affected, but it affects those communities big time in what they're able to do and like I said, keep their schools, which is the primary that they're looking for.
Yeah, the reason, I ask our researchers to take a look at this, I'm going back all the way to the first chart, and Eric's gonna have to shrink Betty for a second. Is this chart sorry. Last year, 16 buildings. That was by far the most we saw in any one year. And given how many are considering it, I thought, well, let's at least have our researchers look at some research so we could give that to you. Because you look at before that, Kathy, and they were all single, we're just growing so slowly. And we were actually growing as those rules, I'll couple with Ann, what we saw before really in the last couple of years, as some of your districts got smaller and smaller and smaller, that's when they started to think about changing. But now we're starting, Baxter Springs really started the discussion now, larger districts and looking across the border. And I thought, well, the board ought to at least know, because you're going to be asking me, I know legislators ask all the time, at least what do we see currently? And of course, there'd have to be a ton more research done on it. So.
One more. Dina?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this certainly gives a picture that when I asked that we look at this or find out more about what was going on, I didn't realize we had schools that had been doing this for years and years. But I think it certainly gives a lot of information now that individuals can access and look at and make decisions surrounding it. I'm not sure it's totally clear that one's better than the other in any way, because there are a lot of variables always that we didn't consider when we're looking at just kind of the basic facts of the research. But it's definitely opened my eyes to what reasons other districts have made that choice, and I appreciate very much that you did the research and we can share that information with those folks who call us and say, help our districts considering doing that, and I don't know that that's a good idea. And so we can help them have some information to support their thoughts on the idea. So thank you again.
Well, Haley didn't tackle you. So.
Well, she wants to. Our researchers, Beth usually starts, Randy, our research team. You can't say this, you can't say that, which is always true, right? Because there are limitations to what the research can tell you. And there are limitations, as we said, that what we look at. It would have been inappropriate to look at Kansas City, Kansas versus Weston, because we don't have any urban school districts at this point in a 4-day week. as we talked about, it would be great to look, as Betty said, what's the effect on kids in free lunch? But that in size may be so small because our number is so small already, we probably can't do that now. So there's all kinds of limitations. We can just show you what we see right now. So thank you.
You'll hear researchers say correlation does not equal causation.
That's right.
And
Exactly.
I'm really hung up on the novice teachers in those districts. So Haley, if you want to add anything about things that stuck out to you, I'd be kind of curious. But that was the one that jumped at me.
One of our research team doesn't get in front of you very often, so we're excited.
You don't have to say a word.
I think so many things stood out to me when we were looking at this research. But nationally, we're kind of seeing a similar thing. Looking at academic performance, there's not significant difference, or buildings doing 5-day school weeks are doing a little bit better. Same thing that we see with our state assessments and our ACT scores. In other states, they're looking at things like impact on the music program, or we don't see many looking at at-risk students. It's kind of overall student performance. Everybody's pretty much a rural community across the nation that's doing this, but again, in recent years, we see more of those urban schools kind of looking at it, seeing if that's an option. The novice teacher, of course, that's kind of a newer thing as well. As a recruitment tool, I think, as Randy mentioned in the past, the rationale for using a 4-day school is more around cost savings. And in recent years, there's been an interest in using it as a tool to recruit and train teachers, but I don't think we have the data quite yet to say if that is, a useful tool for keeping teachers. Rural communities obviously have different challenges than urban districts, so it'll be interesting to see how the data changes over time, but yeah. Thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, nice work. Thank you. We will take a break. Let's come back at 10:25. Welcome back. And we're going to welcome Dr. Ben Proctor to act on at-risk funding and recommendation to the legislature. Hello.
You're going to have to suspend rules if you're going to.
Dr. Proctor, if you want to go ahead and do your presentation, then we will discuss how to proceed with the action item.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board, and Dr. Watson. I'm following up on our conversation yesterday around at-risk and our evidence-based list. And we presented a list based on the review that our team conducted throughout the fall that we believe meets a standard that is in accordance with the law, with the exception of that 5-year research period. And so this is an opportunity for the board to consider several different parts of action should you choose to take that action, and those are listed up here on the screen. I do need to make, I introduced you to Julie Ewing yesterday, one of our assistant directors in CSAS, and she informed me that we have an item that's on the list that needs to be removed. It was just put on there by mistake. And it's actually a program that would be an expired program. So it was just it was an editing issue, but guided reading would go off of the list. That would not be included on the evidence-based list, just as an item for you if you would consider ultimately approving the evidence-based list. So just a mistake on our end, and wanted to correct that for you. So just real quickly to walk through these recommendations for consideration of the board. These would all be things that we talked about yesterday that would help us meet the obligations that are in the statute, but ultimately help our educators and benefit our students. That's the real point of the work that we're proposing here. So the first recommendation would be the elimination of the research requirement from the definition of evidence-based instruction, and that's the same language used in the legislative post-audit report that was presented to the legislature last summer. And then secondly would be approval of the evidence-based list after we've done that research that you have in front of you with the one edit that we made today, as presented based on the removal of that 5-year research requirement. So again, that list is based on that first recommendation that 5-year research requirement be eliminated. And then we walk through the provisional process and the ability for a local school district to tell us that there's a program or a practice that's working well for them that's benefiting their at-risk students, and we would have that process in place for those applications to be submitted to us for provisional approval, which would then allow that school district to continue using that practice or program that wouldn't necessarily be on the evidence-based list itself. So those are the considerations for the state board.
Anne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really want to congratulate your staff on how quickly they put this together. I know this was a huge lift to do all the research and put this together. And I know Dina will tell you too that we really need to get approval of this so we can go back to show the legislature, you know, we've not been sitting on our hands. We've been working on this for a long time, and hopefully we can use these recommendations to get a better bill than the one they have on the table. So are you ready for a motion, or?
Mark, do you want to coach us here, or Ann, do you have the motion ready?
Oh, that's right, we need to suspend. I'd like to.
And my only confusion was whether both 4 and 5 were being converted from information only, or they weren't on the agenda to be an action item, and that's been clarified, that understanding that both 4 and 5.
Yeah.
So
If you have the actual language to suspend the rules and one of those ladies wants to read it, that's fine. Is it
It's
up
on the
there?
back. It's at the top of
Which
yesterday's.
one? Yeah, I know. That's what I'm looking for, the motion to suspend the rules.
Top of Tuesday. You can borrow the beginning.
Okay. I move to suspend the board policy of only voting on action items a month after they are received in order to call a present matter for an immediate vote.
Will that apply to both?
That was, I know. Do you want me to do both at once or just at risk?
For each one move for each
Okay.
one separately.
This would be on the at-risk item.
Okay. All right, so I have a motion from Ann. Is there a second? Dina? Any further discussion on the list on the board? I think I've got,
The at-risk, yeah.
we're moving to suspend the rules. Sorry, yes. All right, ready to vote? All in favor of suspending the rules? And Betty, that is 9-0. Motion passes. Okay, we can now return to conversation. I've got Kathy's hand up.
So this list is a work in progress, correct?
Correct.
So this is what we're doing at this moment to get started, in reality, going off of all of this. So this can be pared down, added to, would it really kind of remain a fluid list in reality?
Well, so this is where we want to make a clear message to the field, Kathy.
Right.
Once you approve a list, that is the approved list for school districts to use until you change the list.
Okay.
So while the staff will bring you periodic updates to that, it is going to be fluid. It's not fluid every month, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so I just want the field to understand that's listening. They would have to either be on the approved list or use the provisional requirement that we're recommending to do something locally. But on some periodic basis that our staff would feel, hey, there's enough time for us to look at these, we would bring you at least once a year, maybe more often, changes to that list.
So with that in mind, if I could ask, to make sure I'm understanding, these programs, are they all considered at-risk programs?
Yes.
But still can be used in the general education?
They're all so the research that we looked at and the standard that we're applying for anything that would be on that list is that there's a benefit to at-risk students.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
So
has
that, yes.
benefit too. Thank you.
I'm ready for a motion.
I move the Kansas State Board of Education adopt the new at-risk list and recommendations as presented.
And you might want to add with the removal of guided reading. Is that necessary, or is it already off the list, Ben?
I'd say
I
it's
don't-
already off the list.
Yes,
Okay.
I believe.
Want to make sure that we've been very clear about that. Okay, is there a second for Ann's motion? Dina? Further discussion or questions? Ready to vote? All in favor, raise your hand. Betty? That is 9-0, motion passes. Okay. Next up, we have the commissioner. Thank you, Dr. Proctor.
So assume we'll follow the same format. I'll go over some things. You can decide whether or not to suspend the rules. All right, so as we were going over this yesterday, this is the literacy discussion now. Not COVID, Eric. This will be the literacy one. Guess who was listening? You know, you think no one listens to your meetings sometimes, right? Our Cracker Jack reading team across the state they were actually meeting. And Lori Curtis and her team were listening. And like Jim Porter tells me all the time, tell your staff to quit answering me when he was chair, when I post something, when I'm just thinking about it late at night or on a weekend. She sends me a very nice email. you might suggest changing the language. And our team has some suggestions for changing the language. And I said, sure. So I went by and told her this morning, I've done that. So what you have in front of you is, and I'm just going to go to that slide, not go over all the details. It would be what this is not it. So the latest slide, Michaela, where's that deck at? Yeah, I know. Is there an extra one? Okay. Is this it, Eric? Do we think we got the, thank you, Deborah. Yep. Okay. Eric's trying to drive, I'm trying to drive. So here's what our reading team, and by the way, when I say our reading team, that starts with our internal people, but we have field consultants that are all across the state, east, west, north, and south. And this is their recommendation. So I'm just going to read it so that it's kind of in the record, and Kathy's already comparing it, and that's really good. Thank you. Kansas State Board of Ed requires all accredited schools in Kansas to use evidence-based methodology fully aligned with the science of reading. Here's what they wanted to make sure you inserted. Specifically structured literacy. They are saying that's the methodology. The science of reading is the breadth of the research, but the structured literacy is the specific methodology. To provide literacy instruction for students. To go on, the Kansas State Board of Ed prohibits the use of practices and pedagogy identified in research to be counterproductive to reading acquisition and achievement. Guided reading. So we talked about 3Qing yesterday and said, why don't we put all these? Guided reading is one of those prohibitive things. Like, got to get it out of there. So is 3Qing. And then the final is the same. In addition, the state board recommends literacy-specific universal screening measures, diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments. So no change in that last. The change is really the structured literacy and breaking the two apart. And so I'd be happy to answer questions. Again, trying to make, this is the work that you have done, trying to make a more definitive statement for people that believe you've not done specific enough work around this, and more clearly stating that. That's what our reading people, by the way, they said they were very excited by the conversation that you all were having, and they were appreciative of that.
Michelle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did we add the sentence from yesterday that Kansas State Board of Education prohibits the use of practices and pedagogy identified in research to be counterproductive to reading acquisition and achievement?
That is different, yes.
Okay.
So the other one said had detrimental effects. What did it say, Kathy?
Yeah, that one's shorter. So
Yeah,
it's
it was.
More concise.
Yeah, it was.
I just, that word achievement just, because once you can read, once a kid can read, you read forever. You might read bigger books or more, use more verbose words. But once you can read,
So what if, Michelle,
you just go like this.
what if
can
you
read.
just said counterproductive to reading acquisition and ended the sentence right there? Would you feel more comfortable?
I think so, because we get caught with outsiders getting us on achievement and proficiency, and then nobody can really define it, and then we get to, now you're not achieving, or you're not it's like, okay.
So
It just, that word just shut out.
I think you could take out an achievement, and that does not, what you're trying to say is science of reading structured literacy is what you have to do, and you can't use other methodology that research doesn't show to work. I mean, that's in essence what we're trying to say.
Because research, science constantly changes over,
That's right.
So we would be stuck if we had a law or something specific that says, because things get brought to us, and people discover different, as
Yeah,
everybody's
correct.
different, so, thank you.
Anne.
Thank you, and I like that suggestion, Michelle. A smaller target's almost always better, but I like what staff wrote, and I think it's more clear. So just to be clear about this, what we're doing here will be inserted into this document?
Correct, right up front.
Okay. And really, what it's doing for those out in the world is reiterating what we voted on in 2020, really.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
This is
and
not
just
anything new. This is trying to give a very definitive statement
Right.
that people can look to first versus having to maybe find it in all the things
Yeah,
that
so
you've
we're
done.
just reiterating what we did 4 years ago for anybody who missed it, and to be more clear that we started this a long time ago. But do you want that motion again?
That would be great.
I move to suspend the board policy of only voting on action items a month after they are received in order to call a present matter for an immediate vote on literacy.
Thank you. Is there a second? Dina? Any further discussion on the suspension? No. Ready to vote on the suspension? All right. All in favor, raise your hand. That's 9-0. And Kathy?
Oh, and I didn't mean to hit that again. Because I finally can say the word pedagogy, doesn't mean I fully understand the word pedagogy. So for me and hopefully others, could you define pedagogy?
It's the practice of teaching. It's
So when we say prohibits the use of practices and.
that would be like materials, and the pedagogy would be how I present it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Guided reading would be an example of that, where I'm in small groups doing guided reading. Thank you. No, thank you. And I think Danny sometimes says things to me. Please, I will tell you, I'm in meetings every day. Beth will know this. I'm in meetings every day where in our agency someone's using acronyms, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So so it's never a bad question to ask that. And I appreciate those clarifications.
Jim Porter?
This didn't have anything to do with this, but I used to be on a hospital board, and I told them all the time, talk to me in words, not letters. And so I'm going to make the motion, and I'm going to leave out the words "and achievement," if that's acceptable. The Kansas State Board of Education requires I move that the Kansas State Board of Education requires all accredited schools in Kansas to use evidence-based methodology fully aligned with the science of reading, specifically structured literacy, to provide literacy instruction for students. The Kansas State Board of Education prohibits the use of practice and pedagogy identified in research to be counterproductive to reading acquisition. In addition, the State Board recommends literacy-specific universal screening measures, diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments to be utilized by accredited schools and school districts.
Thank you. Is there a second? Jim McNeese. Jim and Jim. Further discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. 9-0, motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item number 6. We might be behind, but we're at least on track and not moving things around today. I'm welcoming you back for ESSER funds.
I am not.
Randy's getting his exercise today. Back and forth.
Usually it's 15 minutes and then on Tuesday. Eric's been trying to get this slide deck up there for the last 2 days, so thanks, Eric. We're there. All right. I'm going to walk you through the history of what is commonly called ESSER funds. This is the money given to the state of Kansas during the pandemic. And it expires the end of this year. And I'll talk about that because we're able to get an extension. There is no additional money coming, though. I'm going to walk you through the history. I want to answer questions. Many of you here today were not on the board when this started, and kind of, again, tell you what it is. So here's the ESSER, Emergency and Secondary School Emergency Relief. ESSER. By the way, you use the word ESSER or the acronym ESSER long enough, then you ask people what to stand for, and everyone has to look it up because it becomes ESSER. It's called, like FFA. FFA, what's FFA stand for? No, it does not. It stands for FFA. I'm just saying they changed. It used to stand for Future Farmers of America. All right, there are 3 separate allocations that were made to states called number 1, number 2, number 3. And there was funding for each of these, and they were distributed. This is what's important for you. Well, there's lots of things important to understand. They distributed the funding because the federal government in this emergency had no way to send the money to the states. So they distributed under the Title I distribution method. Title I is meant to go to poverty schools for reading and mathematics. And so it went primarily on that distribution formula. That's important because when we talk about who gets the money, poverty schools were going to get a bigger percent of the money relative to their students. Non-public schools also received money in this. And I don't ever remember that occurring. Of course, there's never been a pandemic in my lifetime either. But that was called, it was actually called EANS 1 and EANS 2. And those had different rules, but they went exclusively to private schools. Okay? So here's the bucket. Here's the chart we used over and over. Jim McNeese is going to go, oh, I remember this chart now. By the way, these aren't good things to remember, COVID. It's just not good. But so the first was called, again, ESSER 1. This is President Trump, and this happened in March of 2020. This is when schools were shut down. Every school, I believe, in the country was shut down from March to whenever school was out. I say that there may have been some, but in general, because we didn't have a vaccine, we didn't know much about it. So there was $85 million in the first round, okay? Had to be used by March of 20, and I'll talk about the $8 million for special ed. Then in December of 20, before President Trump left office, there was a second round. And there was $370 million in the second round, had to be used by March of 20. And then President Biden came into office, and there was a third round in March of 21. So there were three chunks of money that came to us fairly quickly. That's within a calendar year, three big chunks of money that had to be distributed and spent in a very short period of time. Now, I think we could all argue the merits, why that was done. Was it done effectively? But that's what it was done. Now, on the private school side, the first set of money, $27 million, came with ESSER 2. So this gets confusing by the numbers, but EANS 1 and ESSER 2 came together. There was no private school money in the first distribution. And then when ESSER 3 came out, EANS 2 came out, 25 million, so 25 million. Now here's what's interesting that I want to talk to you about today. 3 of those buckets have been spent and they're done. The money's it's gone. It's been spent by the school districts. We're able, and we talked about this a little yesterday, we're able by the United States government, Department of Ed, has said we can liquidate our ESSER 3 funds through July 1 of 2026. So that's why we're going to discuss it. We set up a task force called Commissioner's Task Force on ESSER, chaired by Jim Porter, not required by law. Has legislators on it, has superintendents on it, has the director of budget of the state of Kansas on it, has the chair of House Education, is the vice chair of that committee. Kathy serves on it too. It was done to be transparent of how this money was going to be spent, both by school districts and by the state. So again, there's the membership, 19 members, and it was to provide oversight of both the private and the public money. Not required by law. I don't know if other states did or not. I asked you to commission that because I wanted transparency. We were already getting, people are going, well, you're not going to spend that money right. How are we going to know if the money's spent right? And I will tell you, because you heard from them yesterday, right? It's almost a cycle now of how we approve it. That has gone remarkably well. And we meet at 3 o'clock on Fridays when we meet via Zoom, and now those meetings are well under 30 minutes because they're in a routine. But they've provided that oversight. You still vote on it, but they've provided that oversight to you. 90% of the funding has to go to school districts. I'll show you that in a second. So here's ESSER 1. Here's, I want you, by the way, you're going to get all this, you know, the PowerPoint. So we received $85 million. 90% of that by federal law had to go out to schools on the Title I formula. So we got it. We call it flow through. Sent it out. So 76.5 of the 85 went directly to school districts in March of 20. We asked, and the state board authorized, we had discretionary funds of 9.5%. And we said, why don't we give that to school districts to use for special education needs? Because remember, special education funding was coming down. We thought we could give a little bit. So $8 million went to special ed on the special ed formula. And then we kept 0.5% to run, to administer as per law. That's it. Districts then had to spend that, and they have. They've spent all of that money. By the way, most of this went for opening schools, cleaning supplies, math. I mean, because we're trying to get back in school. So that's what, technology, because we were at home a little bit. Then we came out with the second round. 90% of the $369 million had to be sent to schools. That's $332 million. It was sent to schools. And then we started to notice something. We didn't really notice it. I'm going to come back. $85 million is a lot of money, but when you distribute it across the state, it's not all that much. But in the second round, when we jumped to $370 million almost, that's starting to get a lot of money now. We're infusing into schools. And what we noticed was every school district was heavily impacted by COVID. It didn't matter whether you were poor or wealthy, you were impacted. You were trying to get back in school. And so we worked out a formula and we called it, I don't know where we came up with this name, True Up. Sounds interesting today, looking back. But what we did was we took the wealthy school districts like Blue Valley and Mays and said they're trying to get back in school. They need cleaning supplies too. And they didn't get much money on the Title I distribution. So what we did was give all districts we insured would get at least $300 a student. That was the bar. So they were getting less than $300 a student. So we raised that. So the Kansas City, Kansas school district still got more per pupil, but we tried to have what we called a floor. That was $11.5 million. We spent $24 million again in special ed formula. So again, part of what's coming off that you need to know is you're supporting some of the special ed formula with ESSER money, and that's coming off. So school districts, you know, they're telling you that they're underfunded, and then this is going to come off too. And we gave $200,000, $100,000 each to the School for the Blind, School for the Deaf. Michelle will remember why, because they didn't get any money in this distribution. So they came to us and said, and so the board said, why don't we give you some money too, so you can obviously try to stay open. Again, we kept 0.5% as required by law to administer the funds. So we are hiring temporary people to administer this. And that has all been spent. ESSER 3. I just want you to look at the dollar amounts. It gets really large. So we thought 370 was really large. That was in December of 20. December of 20. In March of 21, here comes another check for $830 million. Now again, some of you don't like that. I'm just telling you what happened, all right? We had to distribute it. 90% of that went out to schools. $747 million, that's 90% of the 830 on that Title I formula went out to schools. We did the same thing with True Up. This time we brought the floor to $600 a student. So no district received less than $600 per student in ESSER 3, and that enabled our more wealthy districts to have at least a floor. We were worried about kids that were not applying to go on past school because school was so disrupted. We used $1 million of those dollars on what we call post-secondary transition, trying to help with that. And teachers, the Kansas Teachers of the Year said, can you give us some money? We want to get teachers together and start to rebuild some things that we lost. We call it Kansas Leads. Some of you've been to those. We do a couple a year, and they're wonderfully attended. That's $300,000. Again, you can see our admin costs there. And then we had a new category in ESSER 3 called learning loss. So for the first time, in the other two, there was just a chunk of money spent it. In this, the federal government said, both to the school districts and to the agency, you have to spend 5% of that money on the loss of student learning, specifically. You can spend it all if you want, but you have to spend that. State board then did this, something called letters training. So we're going to put a lot of money into math training and letters training of teachers. We're still continuing that, as you'll see. We also put some in the Kansas Can competencies and competency learning because we were trying to, could we go to competency-based learning because we may not have schools? I'll talk more about that in a second. And we wanted some enhancement of assessments through KU, and some what we call fast bridge data, purchasing of a screener for that. We spent some money on summer enrichment. We gave money to Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA, and 4-H across the state to bring kids in activities throughout the summer to help that learning loss. And we did something called the Sunflower Summer. You remember that, Dina? Pretty successful. All kids. So successful, the Department of Commerce has taken it over. But we kicked that off. We had some after-school programs. We asked for the same partners, Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA's, 4-H. Can you do some after-school tutoring? That's true of the fund, the 21st Century Centers. So that was after school. So that's what we did. I'm sorry, that's what we did. And now we have an extension from the U.S. Department of Ed to expend those funds instead of this fall through July 1 of 2026. Just our money. Yeah. Shawnee Heights would have to request their own waiver. Just our money. No new money. Please understand, there's no new money coming in, but we anticipate, and I'm just giving you what's going to be brought back to you in March and April. So this is no action today. We anticipate that at the end of this fall, we will have somewhere between $22 and $29 million that we have not spent out of that money. We thought we would spend it, we just haven't spent it. I'll walk through that. And most of what we're going to be asking you to do over the next several months is extend some of that work, like letters training. So the distribution is out. So you see I've marked through that. That's been sent. This is ESSER 3. The true up, there's no more true up. I mean, that money that's gone to school districts has been all sent out. This is the money left at KSDE. We would recommend, this is information today, we would be recommending 1 million. And by the way, when we say a word like $1 million, we're really talking about over 2 years, right? 24, 25, and the 25, 26 school districts. This would continue working with a company called HirePass out of Manhattan, Kansas, that highlights jobs, primarily jobs that don't require a baccalaureate degree that are in Kansas, but helps the transition for kids into post-secondary. Kansas Leads. The Kansas teachers have asked us, could we continue that for 2 more years? There's rarely a month goes by. I'll just tell you, I was in Wichita last weekend at one of my favorite places. See if Jim and Betty agree with this. Nifty Nut House. If you've never been to Nifty Nut House in Wichita, 1930, Nifty, you got to go. If you love nuts, candies. And I'm in Nifty Nut House, and I'm buying nuts. And a lady comes up to me and she goes, does it really irritate you when people just come up to you at places like Nifty Nut House and tell you, hey, thanks for your work, and I'm a teacher in Russell, Kansas? And I said, no, I said, probably it irritates my family, or not irritated, my family thinks it's odd, but, and she said, I just went to the Kansas Lead Conference in Topeka and it changed my life. I got rejuvenated by these outstanding teachers. This is a veteran teacher, and I'd been a little down. Anyway, I get that about every month. It's run by teachers, our Kansas Teachers of the Year. We give them a little bit of money, and they run 2 a year. Statewide training. I think we have to commit to our math training, our letters training, and make sure that more teachers get that training over the next 2 years. So just an extension. I'm just talking about extending these things. These aren't new priorities. These were approved by the board. And the assessment assistance, you approved some of that, but enhanced interim assessments. Purchase FastBridge, our districts use that. We can help buy that down. You can see the dollar amounts here. And then some possible additional priorities based upon your goals to enhance leadership training. We'd love to put a little bit of money into principal and superintendent training. That would work through Kansas State with what's called the Kelly, that's first and second year superintendents. It also would work with USA Kansas and what's called Elevate Leadership 1 and 2, principals and superintendents. Whoops. And so that would come into the learning loss. We're still evaluating whether or not where we're going to be exactly money-wise. If you add this up, it does not equal 22 to 29 million. I'm just giving you what I will bring back to you a specific budget in March with a specific allocation of these items. But I wanted you to see what we had done in the past and what we're going to be recommending. Again, no new money. I'm going to bet you that if we go down this road through 2026, someone's going to come up to you and go, well, the feds gave you more money. There's no more money. It's allowing us to not have to liquidate it by this fall. And especially in letters training, I think it would be so important. It allows us, I think, to continue these things. No action today, but I'd be happy to try to answer questions. What you're going to see in this PowerPoint are all the legal uses of it too, by law, that goes over. And I'm just going to let you read that between this month and next month. In March, it will be a receive item with a budget. In April, we'd ask for your vote. And then we could go forward if you decide to. Madam Chair, I'll stand for any questions. And I don't think I'm up after this, by the way, so just want to point that out.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that everybody has their thoughts on all of this, but, you know, there were businesses across the state that got millions in COVID relief because they needed it, and our kids needed it too. I was fortunate enough to be in contact with Topeka 501 administrators the spring of 2020 when everything just shut down, and the digital divide, for one, just became glaringly real. I mean, we had kids who had no internet at home, and so that fourth 9 weeks, they got nothing. And I know 501 scrambled and worked with Cox, for one, to get hotspots put in homes, but if you have 4 kids in one hotspot, you know, you're not getting very much. So if nothing else, I think the whole COVID pandemic brought out the inequities in the systems. And I know, I mean, school administrators and board members all across the state have told me, you know, they don't know what they would have done without this money, particularly urban districts. I mean, those kids in Wichita and Kansas City were essentially virtual for a year. And it's going to take years, according to the research, to even get them back on board, if ever. So I'm really thankful for the money, and I'm really pleased so far with what we've done with our discretionary money. I think we did a really good job of tackling some big issues and help with learning recovery. So anyway, I'll be anxious to see what you bring us.
Well, what you see is basically what I'm going to be bringing. I want to say this. If you were to decide, no, we don't want to do this, we would just liquidate the funds by this fall. I mean, what we're asking you to do is extend it through 2026 with the priorities that we're bringing you. You also get asked sometimes, how much money was this per pupil? I just wanted you to see this. So on the left is the public school money by ESSER 1 and SPED. It totals $2,700. On the right is a private school money. It totals $4,100. You say, well, why did the private schools get more? It looks like there was more money because there were fewer students in the private schools than there were in the public schools when you distribute that. And not every, you had to apply on the private school side. The Lutheran schools and the Catholic schools tended to apply. But I get asked that a lot. Well, how much was that per pupil? And I wanted you to see that. So what, letters training, math training, money for higher pass, for higher ed. I'll just go back through it so you can see it. So principal and superintendent training, letters training, enhanced assessments, the higher pass post-secondary training, Kansas leads. And there may be one or two items that staff say, you know, we really need to take a look at that. No more money extending that through 26. So.
Betty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, this is kind of a distant cousin to the presentation you're making.
I like distant cousins.
I get the question a few times that given ESSER was not used for the ongoing expense or running of school districts, but instead was set up to adapt special needs. That being the case, why is the loss of ESSER funding impacting day-to-day operation?
Thank you. I think that's a close cousin. I'm not sure that's a distant cousin. We encourage districts, just like you, use this money to infuse one-time money. Now, Betty, some of what we did was help support special ed. And we thought if we can do that, the legislature will fully fund special ed before we get out of it. That has not been true. But that was the thought. So that money is going to come off. Most districts, Betty, use the money for one-time expenses or to infuse expenses. Some did not. Both private and public. Some did not. And they're going to have a tough time transitioning. Okay? Now, again, I want to talk to you about the mass size. Most used it. Okay? They could use it on anything that was legal. And they've all done that because we have oversight of that. But most used it for temporary expenses. Some used it to replace heating cooling systems, right? That's a great use. It was a great use. Some used it for summer school to get kids caught up. But Betty, some used it for ongoing expenses. And those districts that did that are going to have to adjust budgets coming out of 2024. Especially if they're in declining enrollment, school districts also, because then that would be a double loss.
Okay, so in trying to develop my response to that question, a lot of it hinges on special education funding. Is that?
Well, that is certainly true because those costs continue to eat into every school district's budget, and they're going to lose that money that you saw is going to come out of what you were able to put in. So that's just going to add to the loss of aid that they have not been receiving in special ed funding.
All right. Thank you.
Pam.
Thanks. I know it was really too bad, I think, that the private schools didn't get to use their money for permanent stuff. Like they couldn't buy anything that was going to be permanent, and where we got to buy heating and air stuff so we could get kids back in school, but that was kind of something weird.
Do that. Because at the end of the grant, any permanent, like just use a computer, if it has any value, actually goes back.
I know.
Has to be sold.
But they also, I think, were able to access the PP, whatever they call it, the payroll protection stuff. So if they got that, then they didn't get the EANS money. It was kind of crazy.
You're getting way in the weeds, but that's true. Yeah.
It's government,
Any other questions? I just have a comment. I liked that it's the smallest item on there, I think, but the principal and superintendent training and leadership. Can you tell me a little bit more about, do you know exactly where that money will go, what that program looks like?
Yes, I know exactly. So So one of your board goals is to enhance leadership training. What's happening right now on your behalf is that we have a group of superintendents putting together what we call competencies for leadership. I want to be a principal, or I'm at the end of my career as a superintendent. What are the competencies in about 8 different domains? And those will be presented to you this fall as your goals. Then every program will align to those in a continuum development. So I start my career and I'm at level 2 as an example, and maybe it's a 10-point scale, and I get training and I can go in my development. These programs would be some money for Kelly, so to enhance their coaching program of the first and second year, superintendents primarily, a little bit of principals, and then what's called Elevate Leadership, USA Kansas. And that program is a 2-year program for principals. And they will be developing, Chair Haas, they will be developing an Elevate for superintendents. So I go through my first 2 years, and then we're going to coach you on the next, on things like literacy, data, how to budget effectively. Is a 4-day week worth it? I mean, all of these things, because again, remember, we're greening our profession at a rapid rate. And so we just think that training is going to be really, really important. And so we can infuse that. What both of those entities tell me, by infusing that, it allows them to jumpstart it, and they will have funds to carry it on for, if you can get it, if we can help initiate that. That was important. Otherwise, why do it, right? Because then it all collapses.
I have to say that one of the reasons that I got into this work was because early in my career, I began to witness the rift between teachers and administrators. And at that time, in the 90s, that kind of training was really lacking. So I'm excited to hear that. Thank you. Jim Porter.
You sort of refer to this, and as is my custom, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I certainly hope that during this process of training administrators that they do have the opportunity to learn the importance of structured literacy.
And we're asking all of them to go through the administrative version of letters too. So no action. I just wanted to get it out in front, answer questions, kind of give you the history. But that latter part will be the parts that I bring back to you for consideration as a receive item in March.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Look at the agenda, make sure I'm not.
You are not next.
Thank you.
Scott Gordon is next with a presentation on pending amendments to the PPC regulations. Welcome back.
Thank you. If Commissioner Watson wants to take on the reins, that's fine.
No.
So a funny thing happened to me on the way to work this morning. Got a call from a colleague asking the question, I had a teacher arrested in the school. Is this something I'm supposed to report to you? Yes. That was my simple answer, was just yes. And her follow-up question was, well, what's the regulation that says I have to do that? And so we had a little conversation. So there's some work clearly that needs to be done about communicating what administrators need to do regarding reporting misconduct, as well as defining what the misconduct is.
Maybe we should do some training.
Yeah, I have a feeling, well, that's gonna, depends on what happens next month. Next month, you all will be conducting a hearing to approve, hopefully, the proposed amendments to the PPC regulations that I'm sharing with you today. My hope is that you will approve them overwhelmingly. And as a result of that, yes, I imagine there will be quite a bit of professional development and training and sessions that I'll be doing to anyone that will have me to explain the proposed changes in the regulations. These particular changes, by the way, were started in 2017. That's how long I've been trying to get these regulations back to you so that you could formally adopt them. As an overview, you may think and others may believe that I'm greatly trying to expand the authority of the state board and of the Professional Practices Commission to take action against someone's license, and that's really not true. If anything, there's actually a reduction in the breadth of the authority of the state board as a result of this and a result of state law that was passed, but it is more specific, and it is more, it gives better guidance and better awareness for the educators in the field. So specifically, here are the regulations that we're being asked to amend. I will tell you this process started with one, and then it just kept growing as we were reviewing them and realizing, well, if you change a word here, you've got to change a word elsewhere. I think the last time that these were ever taken to the board, by the way, was in 2020. So many of you have never seen these before, and those of you that have seen them before, you may not remember exactly what they said. So the first change is in 9122(1)A, and for the past 20-some years, 9122(1)A has covered denial, revocation, suspension, or public censure. We have split them into two different areas. 1A deals specifically with denial, and it does indicate any license issued by the state board may be denied for any of the following reasons. And originally it said, if you've been convicted. You would be amazed how many people will argue with me over what it means to be convicted, and the number that are surprised to find out, I didn't know I'd been convicted of that. I just pled no contest to it. That means you were convicted. Other states also handle this very differently. They don't necessarily call it a conviction. So we've tried to eliminate any ambiguity and wrote any version by which you may be found guilty by a court of law, even if sentence is never imposed. Missouri, for example, handles it where you may be placed on probation for 5 years after being found guilty of a felony, but after your 5 years probation ends, they no longer in Missouri consider that to be a conviction. Kansas disagrees. So we are still leaving that as if at any time this ever happened to you, it counts. It does describe any crime punishable as a felony. That is not a change. It used to say any crime involving a child. We've clarified that we're talking about a child under the age of 18 other than the accused. So a minor in possession, for example, has never been a case that I've ever taken to the state board. I don't think you've ever seen that case. We're not talking about those. Or someone that's buying cigarettes younger than they're supposed to buy them. We're talking about if there's some other child involved, such as a DUI where you have children in the car. That's what we're talking about. If you've ever been convicted of any crime involving theft or any crime involving drug-related conduct, that part has not changed. The commission or omission of any act that injures the health or welfare of a minor through physical or sexual abuse or exploitation, that has not changed. I think we clarify engaging in any sexual activity with a student. Someone did ask me a couple of weeks ago, well, what does that mean? My response was, if you have to ask, that means don't do it. Just don't risk it. That obviously would be decided on a case-by-case basis. Number 4 is brand new language. And I would tell you this was language that we struggled with. This was language that I'm proud to bring to the state board in Kansas. You will be the first state to adopt this kind of language to address grooming. This language has specifically been included in the model bill that is supported by NASTEC. And I cheated. I took the language from here and I put it in that one because I liked it that much. It has been beat up that much. We're engaging in any behavior that can reasonably be construed as involving an inappropriate and overly personal and intimate relationship with, conduct toward, or focus on a student. You have had a number of these cases come before you. You've had the art teacher that was up till 3 o'clock in the morning texting with her student hundreds of times in the middle of the night. You had the teacher that came overly involved with her 8th grade basketball player that used to drive her across state lines and share hotel rooms with her just to hang out to be friends because they were besties. Again, you've had a number of these cases that you wouldn't necessarily be able, there's no proof that it was specifically sexual, but the PPC and you have asked, well, how do we know that that's something that really counts? What's more important is how do the school administrators know that that is something we want to know about and that they can take action on? So this is an effort to clarify the generic terminology of misconduct or other just cause. So that is the goal of including that specific language in there. The next is an addition. Again, I have brought cases to you before whenever we find out someone has been substantiated by DCF. This just specifically puts it in the regulation to clarify and put everyone on notice, not the least of which are teachers or those that want to be teachers, that if you engage in the conduct that results in a substantiated finding, that may result in a denial of your license. As I explained to individuals across the street a couple of weeks ago, that does not necessarily mean every single case by which someone gets substantiated is going to be brought to you. It isn't. I have probably 24 substantiations that I'm aware of that we have not brought to you for various reasons, but there's someone we do bring to you. It is always going to be on a case-by-case basis. Number 7 is not new. That is failure to report abuse or neglect. Basically, if you are failing to abide by your obligation as a mandated reporter, many times we find out about it, but it is not actually prosecuted criminally. So regardless of whether it's prosecuted criminally or not, that can be a basis by which we will act on your license. Engaging in academic dishonesty, I don't believe is new. That applies whether it happens while you were a student as well as when you were a teacher. Breach of an employment contract with an education agency by abandonment, that is not new either. That is the same language, similar that we've always had. Number 10 is, I think it has been implied, but we're going to be stressing this. If you fail to notify the Commissioner of Education as required, and I want you to remember this part when we get to the next regulation, but if you, as a school administrator, fail to report that you have, for example, a teacher arrested for felonies for which you are, well, I'll just leave that alone, then we may very well come after your license. The purpose of this is to comply with federal law that requires states to set up laws or policies that prevent schools from passing the trash. That's why we've included this language in here, and that's why we've beefed up the language in the next regulation. Number 11 is probably the part that made this take much longer than it probably should have. You have for years been able to deny someone a license based on a diversion after having been charged with any crime involving a felony, theft, drugs, or children. You haven't seen very many of those cases lately, mainly because you've given me authority to clear those with certain exceptions. There was a statute that was passed several years ago. There was an amendment to 74-120 that specifically required all licensing agencies, except for like 15 of them. They're exempt from this law, but you weren't. That says the state agency may not deny someone a license based on an arrest that does not result in a conviction. That's the language of the statute. I have made the argument for years, and I stand by the argument, that a diversion is not the same thing as an arrest. It is a separate, unique legal status. So we fought and fought. We tried twice to get the law changed. It didn't go anywhere. We've come to kind of an agreement, if you will, that there are specific offenses by which you are prohibited by state statute from issuing a license. That's in 72-2165. Some of those offenses for which you are prohibited from issuing a license, unless they show evidence of rehabilitation, some of them are misdemeanors. Not many of them, most of them are felonies. This will remove misdemeanor theft and misdemeanor drug diversions from being a basis by which a license may be denied. So that is what I say by it actually is reducing somewhat the authority that you have to deny someone a license. This will not apply in the next regulation, by the way, when we talk to revocations. This is only talking about denying someone a new license. So there's that. Number 13 is an effort to clarify, because currently it says if there's been a denial, revocation, cancellation of suspension of a professional license from another state. Now, I wasn't here when that regulation was written, but we have interpreted it, and I've made this argument many, many times, that the intent of that regulation is that so long as you have had any kind of professional license denied, revoked, or suspended in any state, then you don't get to come and use teaching in Kansas as a backup plan. Many of you remember the Doug Wright case many, many years ago. We used this provision, or rather the board did, because he had a law license revoked by the Supreme Court. And based on that, and based on his underlying felony, his license was subsequently denied by the state board. Rather than continuing to make that argument, even though it's not clarified in regulation, we're trying to clarify it to mean that if you lose any professional license in any state for reasons similar to what we've already listed, then a license to teach may be denied by you. So that is, and again, an effort to clarify and provide better notification for those that want to be teachers. Subsection B is all new language. I would tell you that is copied and pasted from the state statute. The Reader's Digest version is that if someone wants to write me a letter and provide me with their court documents and give me a check for $50, I will give them an advisory opinion that says, you might get a license, you might not. That's what it's going to say every time. That is what the state legislature required all state agencies to put in, so it's there. By the way, I've been doing that for years and never collected money on it, but now we will. The department will. It's not going to go directly in my pocket. I don't think Dr. Hess would let me do that. Subsection F1 is some clarification. It clarifies the timelines for eligibility to receive a license. Currently, the language is specific to any person who has been denied a license or had a license revoked for that conduct. It is going to be changed to where any person who has engaged in the conduct. So it will apply to everyone, not just those that have already been before the state board. Because I believe the assumption was that if anybody had engaged in the behavior that's described, that somehow we would snap our fingers and they would have a license revoked or denied. But that's not always the case. Sometimes they apply for a license before we ever get around to denying or revoking. So we're trying to clarify that. The current law language also implies any person who's been denied a license shall not be eligible to apply for at least 5 years from the date of conviction or until the person has satisfied the terms of the diversion agreement. There's also language in there that it's 5 years from the date of the conviction or the date of the offense. And there's been some confusion. Well, which is it? Is it the conviction or is it the underlying crime? We've generally argued that it's the date of the conviction, even if that means it's additional time. I see that Ms. Arnold has her hand raised. Madam Chair, if you want me to take questions now, I'm more than happy.
Betty?
Thank you. If you could go back, you lost me a little bit on that professional opinion where they can send you a copy of the court records, and
right.
You lost me there. Could you go back over that, please?
So, and I'll pull the exact language from the regulation.
I think it was, you said, I'll tell them they may or may not get a license.
So it's a non-binding advisory opinion. The language from the regulation is, any individual with a criminal or civil record described in this regulation may submit a petition to the board for an informal written advisory opinion concerning whether the individual's civil or criminal record may disqualify the individual. So I was being a bit flippant when I said maybe, but obviously I can't predict exactly how the board is going to vote in any particular circumstance. If someone, for example, comes to me and they say, well, I've been convicted of 3 felonies in the past 2 years, and one of those felonies happens to be one of those that's listed in statute, that whereby they are prohibited, they're banned from ever receiving a license, then I would tell the person in writing, you are prohibited from receiving a license from the state board. The theory behind that, Betty, is there's a concern that individuals would go all the way through an educator prep program or get a degree because they want to be a teacher, but then it turns out they end up not getting a license. This comes from several agencies having more generic language in their rules, where they don't specifically lay out the exact offenses by which a license may be denied. I think that was the basis of why that was added in legislation.
I guess for me, if I could, it seems like, the $50 with nothing more than, well, I think you may have a problem, or I don't have the final say on this. For me, it seems like then why are we offering this if you can't advise the applicant, it may not be in your best interest to proceed with this, or this indeed is not a factor in issuing you a license. I guess I'm not sure of what value you're giving a person at a $50 charge. If you're saying this and there's no charge, well, we're not going to do this. I can understand that, but when they have to start spending money and still there's no indication that this is their best pathway forward,
Betty?
it's just problematic to me. Yes.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in. I think that the point was this is in statute. You have to comply with this, correct?
I
Scott?
understand that. I'm just trying to I'm trying to understand. I know it's in statute, but does that mean that
We have to comply if it's in statute.
well, let me finish them.
Okay.
Does that mean that we can't offer that person, in a sense, we can give you an advisory opinion, but I guess where they know there's no real teeth to it is where I'm going with that. Because it doesn't sound like there really is. Even though statute requires it, are we still obligated to take their money and say that, or can we provide something additional? And that's just a question.
Sure. Madam Chair, if I may, to answer your question, yes, we have to include it in regulation because I couldn't get it past the Attorney General's office without including it, even though I testified against it twice across the street. No, we
Yeah.
don't have to take the $50.
Okay. Okay. So there's some discretion, and that's good to hear. Thank you for that, Scott. Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. But I will openly say, no, I think it was a really bad idea. And I testified to the same exact thing across the street, but they didn't listen to me. So I know it's shocking, but so yes, I understand your concern, Betty, but that it's in the regulation. If it comes down to, if they want some kind of formal declaration on behalf of the department that they can somehow rely on, then we may say, well, then you're going to have to here's your certified copy of whatever letter. And honestly, I don't expect this provision to be used very often, if ever, because we provide general guidance and we tell people all the time anyway when they call and ask, hey, can I still get a license? We do that. So does that answer your question, Betty? Is that, we good? I think she's nodding her head, so Madam Chair, I'll move on okay. So anyway, I had left off where the clarification was a little bit confusing as to the timelines, so we're trying to clarify it and make it more consistent for everyone. The new language will be that any person who has engaged in this conduct shall not be eligible to apply. If it's a felony conviction, you may not apply for at least 5 years from the date of the conviction. If it is a misdemeanor conviction, then you may not apply until, well, you can apply, but we're not going to process it, until at least 1 year has elapsed from the date of the conviction, or until they've completed probation, if probation is longer. Sometimes you have misdemeanors where they've got a 2-year or 3-year probationary term. The theory being you don't want to give someone a teaching license while they're still on probation, right? So, in fact, I don't know that you've ever allowed someone to keep a license while they're still on probation. So whatever is longer, that's the timeline that we're setting up and we're proposing. If this isn't one of the rare instances where you will be able to deny someone a license based on a diversion, they have to show evidence that they've completed that diversion before they would be eligible to get their license. And for the non-criminal cases, for example, yesterday's case, that was not a criminal matter, okay? At least 1 year has elapsed since the date of the offense or the commission of the acts, if there was no conviction. Trying to keep that at least consistent with what the timeline would be if they'd been convicted of a misdemeanor. So that's what I'm proposing for the eligibility. There are all of the references, again, to revocation, suspension, and censure. Those are moved to the next regulation. I do believe that the proposed regulation complies with state and federal law. And again, you all know that I've been doing this since 2012. I have no concerns about whether or not the profession is being protected by these regulations. I believe it is. I will tell you in all candor, you know, I go and I participate on national conferences on these topics, and we share with other colleagues, well, what is your process like? And I, again, even though sometimes I may feel disgruntled sometimes, I really like our process, both for the educators and for you all in the state of Kansas, much more than many other states out there. There are some states, Kentucky, that they have some proposed laws right now that are horrendous. And they know that I would say that because they're not the ones proposing, it's other people. So for what it's worth, based on my experience, I have no problem with even though we're limiting some of the eligibility or the basis, I think we're fine. The next part is 9122(1)B. This is dealing with suspension, revocation, or public censure. Fortunately, 74-120 does not apply because that only applies to the denial of a license, which means if someone gets on a diversion for theft or drugs while they are licensed, you still have grounds by which you could discipline them if you chose to. I'm not going to go all the way through all of them, Madam Chair, because they are the same. I mean, all of the basis that I shared with you in 1A is still true in 1B. It's got a couple of extra ones. Here is the notification requirement. The current language is that if there's a separation of employment for any of the reasons listed in the regulation. Many times superintendents are either advised or they don't understand what that means. So this is my effort to clarify that if someone has resigned, or if you have fired them, if you've suspended them, if you've just put them on administrative leave, if you've done anything to change their employment status because there are allegations similar to what I've described in the regulation, then you have to let us know within 30 days of that happening. Period. Now, the regulation does say you have to inform the commissioner. Candidly, I accept all of those on behalf of the commissioner. There have been comments, well, aren't you afraid that's going to be a flood of complaints coming your way? Fine. We'll deal with them. If that means I have to hire another attorney, then we'll hire another attorney. Does that mean that I'm absolutely going to start investigating every single person that gets suspended? No. Does that mean they have to report to me absolutely every time someone may get suspended because maybe they're not following the dress code or they're continuously late? No, because those aren't basis by which we would take a license. So we're only talking about separations or something to do with employment based on what's already been covered in 1A or 1B. Again, trying to clarify for the individual that calls me 8 o'clock in the morning, I don't know what to do with somebody that was arrested. Well, now you know. It does clarify in 22-2. Previously, the regulation was written to where I would need to inform the chair of the PPC, and the PPC would decide whether to move forward with a complaint or not. That has not been the practice since at least the first or second day I've started with the agency, because it's weird to go to the jury and say, do you want to file a complaint for me to prosecute, for you to make the decision? So that's just not been a practice, and we've decided to make the regulation consistent with that. So really the only thing the secretary does is keep an accurate file of all of the votes and official acts. On the complaint process, currently it says you have to include the last known address of the licensee within the body of the complaint. Again, that's just weird. I don't know why I have to put someone's personal address within a complaint. It's going to be included in the notice because that's who we're moving it to, but it's just one more, or mailing it to, pardon me. But that's who we're going to mail it to anyway. Rather than just have one more thing to redact, we've removed that reference. We've also removed the requirement to attach all documents as exhibits, because many times we have documents that identify children, or they are very, I don't want to say risque, but they're just things I don't want to share in a public record. Then the reference now will be that if someone wants to see those after I filed a complaint against them, all they have to do is ask, and then I will provide them to the person. I'm trying to clarify and protect the privacy of everyone involved in all candor. Next is the 91-22-5A. In sub E, under the surrender of license, it now authorizes me, or whoever's filed the complaint, that if someone has submitted a voluntary surrender of the license, rather than having to wait until I can get it before the PPC and have them approve that surrender, if I choose to, I can just bring it directly to you. rather than having to go to the PPC first. Again, trying to speed up that process and just streamline things a little bit. On the answer, the regulation has for years said that someone has 15 days to ask for a hearing and then 20 days to file an answer. We're changing that to make it all consistent. Just 15 days, file your answer and file your complaint. Because candidly, if someone files an answer other than, yep, I did it, take my license, I don't care, if they say anything at all, they get a hearing scheduled anyway. So we're just changing that from 20 days to 15 days to be more consistent. It's also more consistent with the Administrative Procedures Act this way. And again, the default cases, if we have mailed notice to somebody, they don't respond at all, rather than waiting until I can get it before the PPC, if I so choose, or whoever the complainant is, they may take that directly to the state board as well. The actual hearing procedure, there are a few parts of our regulations that don't necessarily match 100% with the Administrative Procedures Act. And so this just clarifies that if there's any kind of conflict in deadlines or process, then these regulations are binding and not the Administrative Procedures Act, which shouldn't be a problem because we don't have a statute that requires the Administrative Procedures Act anyway. We just have the regulation. B1 has always included weird language that any person having a substantial interest in the outcome. I don't know what that means. That could be just any random person that says, well, I'm interested. Well, they don't get to ask for a continuance. It has to be someone that's a party to the actual suit. That's consistent with any other form of legal proceeding. And then finally, on page 90, 2225, that clarifies that a complaint may only be dismissed if it was based upon an allegation of a breach of contract. Sometimes people will try to argue and have the PPC just dismiss the case outright. I've always argued against that. It's never really been a problem, but this clarifies that the PPC can make a recommendation to take no action, which you've seen. That's not the same thing as just outright dismissing the complaint. But it does clarify that they can outright dismiss a complaint if it's based on breach of contract for all kinds of other reasons that aren't changed in the regulation. Okay. With that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions with anyone or from anyone regarding the process, the regulations, whatever is at your pleasure.
Scott, if you could just review for the board what happens next so they get a clear picture of that.
Sure. So here's what's happened so far. Years ago, you all approved, you said, yes, you can send these through the formal adoption process. They've been through at least once been through the Division of Budget, even though they don't have to anymore. They've been through the Department of Administration. They've been past the Office of the Attorney General. So we've jumped all those hoops. We have provided notice that the public hearing will be in March. The Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations has already heard the regulations. They have no official comment for you. You'll see that letter next month. Next month, Tuesday at about 1:30, that's when it's scheduled, is when you will have your actual public hearing. That is the opportunity for anyone that wishes to come and be heard about the regulations, very similar to how they appear before you for public comment or open forum, pardon me, they may do so. Or if they want to send letters, they've had 60 days to do that, and I think Deborah's already received at least one from KSDE. The tradition is the hearing takes place on Tuesday. I probably won't present these again on that Tuesday because you've just heard them. But then the following morning, if there is any kind of follow-up or response needed from the agency, we will provide it at that time, and then you will vote. It'll be a roll call vote, so you'll vote one at a time. And if a majority of you vote yes, then these become law within like 15 or 20 days after that.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions.
Thank you all.
All right, our next item is the consent agenda. Item G was pulled, and I'm going to read it. Act on recommendations for funding Kansas preschool pilot grants for 2024-25. May I have a motion to vote on the consent, to approve the consent agenda? Minus that one, yep.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second? Kathy? Discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. And Betty, that's 9-0. And then on item G, can I have a motion to approve?
Madam
Michelle?
Chair.
Second? Dina? Sorry? Mhm. Michelle, then Dina. And Michelle, did you have any questions on that or need? You talked to Amanda? Okay. All in favor of item G, raise your hand. Oh,
Well, I was in the legislature when we started this, and I just can't tell you guys how important this preschool pilot is, both to the board, because it promotes kindergarten readiness, but also because it's a great partnership between public and private providers. And as far as I'm concerned, a great use of that tobacco money. Some people should have said, well, you should have used that to stop people from smoking, but I think if we can spend that on kids, it's even better. And there's $550,000 in here, you know, for 501. And with the COVID that happened and all that's going on with the urban poverty, we visited, you know, Williams School a couple weeks ago, and that's exactly the kind of school that needs this money. So those kids come in there even more ready in the high poverty areas. So I just ask folks for their support for this, for kids who really need it and families. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Anyone else? Okay. All in favor, raise your hand. And Betty is 6. So that's Jim, Melanie, Jim, Dina, and Ann opposed. Michelle, Kathy, Danny, 3. 6 to 3, motion passes. Next up is the chair report. I have one brief item, which is that I need to I'm appointing Jim Porter a few months early, appointing Jim Porter to the executive board of KSHA. We have 2 members that sit on KSHA, and Dina's term is going to be up in July, and so Jim will step into that role as he's already serving on KSHA. Item B is act on board travel requests. You should have the list in your packet. Does anyone have additions or changes for Deborah? Ann?
I'll be going to the, I don't know what they call it, maybe Deborah remembers, the KSDE women's thing in March. I think it's the 6th and 7th, and then on the 7th I'll be going to the Olathe School Board meeting, make a presentation.
Okay.
I've got one. I may have already told you this, but March the 5th, I'm going to ANW Superintendent's meeting. It's an interlocal superintendent's meeting. In Humboldt.
Anyone else? I have a motion to approve the board travel requests. Jim and Dina. All in favor, raise your hand. 9-0, motion passes. Are there any committee reports to share? Ann?
Yeah, I just might mention, we expect, I think we've got one more tribe left to approve it, but you know, a year and a half ago, we formed the Kansas Advisory Council on Indigenous Education, and we've been doing some really cool things, and KBOR's come on board, and a lot of good things have happened, but we have a resolution, which was the original goal. We thought we'd be there before now, but to make KC a permanent advisory group to the board, and to KBOR, actually. They want to be a bigger part of it now, too, and I think they were voting on it this week. But anyway, I expect to at least read it in and give you guys some information about making that a permanent advisory council in March.
Thank you, Ann. Dina?
This isn't a committee report, but I want to thank all of you for all of your gifts and making my birthday a very, very special day. Thank you.
Happy
You want
birthday,
us to sing
Dina.
again?
She wants us to adjourn, is
That'll
what she
be your
wants.
choice.
She wants to have Valentine's Day.
All right, we will move on to the board attorney report. Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the board for approving my contract extension. I'm going to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about some historical perspective and kind of how I got to this part and some of the things that we've dealt with along the way. I do want to express that I do feel that it's an honor and a privilege to represent this governing body, and I thank you for your confidence and continued confidence in me serving as your board attorney. I have been on the board now for 15 years, or not on the board, but serving in the capacity as legal counsel for the state board for 15 years. And with that extension through next year would be 16 years. I'm giving you a little bit of a history because that came up, so it's topical, but want to maybe diverge and just say that if there are things that you want me to present on or either report, one-on-one on breaks or during the meetings, or if you have questions that come up, just shoot me a text or an email, let me know. I might be able to get you an answer immediately or really quickly, or I might, if it's something that's going to require something more extensive, I'm always going to try to talk with the board leadership and say, is that something that, I don't want it to show up on a bill that's going to be, 20 hours of legal research. I can give you some initial feedback, and those are the things, the resources that I can provide. I don't get very many requests right now for specific topics to present on during my portion. So I just kind of look at the agenda, look at the political and legal climate, and report on what I think is relevant and topical, but certainly appreciate any input and direction on things that you want to hear about. And we'll take the annual review and take a look at that and the comments and feedback that I got there, and try to influence my reports. And once again, a similar vein, you didn't ask for I didn't want to solicit you or lobby for the contract, so I didn't present this in advance, but certainly it's topical and want to make sure that you understand some of the history. There is a statute 72-7512 that does require that the state board have an attorney and that the attorney attends all of the board meetings. I'm not aware that that's been modified or amended or attempted to be amended for as long as I can remember. When I left a large firm and joined my current firm in 2009, the then serving attorney, Dan Biles, had made an announcement that he was leaving our law firm and going to the Kansas Supreme Court. He was appointed. So the board then quickly put the proposal, the RFP or RFQ, out through the Department of Administration, and I submitted on behalf of our firm a detailed proposal in 2009. It was a competitive bidding process, so even though Justice Biles served in the same capacity with the predecessor law firm, we had to make sure that everything was, he didn't have any continuity with the law firm. He left. I came in a couple weeks later. I had a 19-year history of representing community colleges, school districts, employment, and other government entities, and so it was just kind of a natural fit for me. The contract went through that RFP process. Those processes are administered by the Department of Administration. They go through all the vetting process, and I met with 2 representatives of the board and was selected in 2009. My history there was either directly for an entity as maybe their counsel, like I am in this role, where I'm kind of direct, not an employee, but on retainer or contractual relationship. Or in many cases, I worked for insurance companies on a panel of attorneys. So if a school district out in western Kansas got sued, then I would come in and work with the school district on that piece of litigation in collaboration with their local attorney. And so I didn't necessarily represent the school district on an ongoing basis, but represented them in a limited capacity in probably 25 different school districts across the state. In that capacity, also my predecessor partners who represented Shawnee Mission School District, Blue Valley School District, some Olathe, Garden Ridgerton, some of the bigger school districts in the Kansas City metropolitan area were law partners that I mentored under over the years and worked for them in this very similar capacity, where I would go to board meetings, consult and advise them on open meetings, open records, governance issues. I served for a number of years as general counsel to Johnson County Community College and served in that. And so there's a lot of government entity issues that came up related to elections, recruitment and retention of CEOs. So all of those things kind of flowed into when I took over and received that contract in 2009. Between 2009 and today, there have been 3 separate, the way they typically set up the contracts are usually for a 2-year period with anywhere from 3 to 5 12-month extensions. And so the longer period is approved, and then when you're within that framework or that time span, both parties can agree to extend for an additional year. So there have been, to my knowledge, at least 2 competitive bid processes. And I was trying to look through my history. There may have been one where I didn't have to submit, but there's 3 contract periods, and I know that I've participated in at least 2 competitive bid processes. A similar role, I have submitted bids and contract, documentation, which require, lengthy information and forms and, proof of your malpractice and all of that for the Attorney General for the state of Kansas, because under the Kansas Tort Claims Act, if the board gets sued or the agency gets sued, you can ask that the Attorney General appoint counsel, okay? They can do that themselves on their dime, or they can appoint a counsel that is reimbursed by the state, by their separate funding. So there's been times when I've represented this body or the School for the Deaf or the School for the Blind, where we would go to the Attorney General and say, under the Kansas Tort Claims Act, can you appoint counsel? And by the way, they want Ferguson to be appointed as counsel to defend this entity. And I mean, the clear purpose of that is to redirect the cost to another agency, so that the costs, because you don't have a separate litigation budget, and so trying to get the familiarity with the clients and the issues, but have that covered under a different expense. So I'm still, doesn't matter the political party of the Attorney General. I've served in that capacity for probably 15 plus years too, in similar capacity, where you get a contract and you have an extension, and you can get considered in the civil attorney pool. And sometimes the Attorney General, they want to handle those cases. There's been litigation in state court. There's been litigation in federal court. And so nothing that is very recent, even though we talk about the possibility of litigation arising out of the PPC final orders. There have been a number of cases over the years that have gone to the district court and even to the Court of Appeals on those. So we've had a number of cases. There's been some conversation before about school finance. Well, there was one, not just the bigger school finance cases, but the Shawnee Mission parents brought a litigation against the state on the LOB, specifically on the LOB. That was in federal court in Kansas. It got appealed to the 10th Circuit twice. We went to Denver and argued that. So even though I'm pretty quiet the last, 18 months, I am a litigator. That's what I do. 90% of what I do is review. I'm in court, in state and federal court. Of course, my primary job is to keep you out of court, and which transitions to my next story, which is in one of the first things that I did in 2009. And this kind of ties back into the whole school finance thing and whether or not the state board or the agency would be a party. Prior to 2009, the state board and the Department of Education had always been parties in school finance litigation. As a precursor to litigation, if you're a government entity, the plaintiffs have to send you essentially it's a demand, but it meets certain statutory requirements under the Kansas Tort Claims Act. We got a notice from the Gannon plaintiffs' attorneys to the state board saying, hey, here's the notification under the Kansas Tort Claims Act. You're going to be a defendant, a target defendant in the Gannon lawsuit. Well, at that time, we had kind of been tired of being through a lot of previous litigation, and while we had an interest in the outcome, we devised a plan that tracked the language of the Constitution, which says, and this goes back to a question that was asked yesterday, which is, the theory was, look, we set policy as the state board, but we don't finance. We are, and I don't mean to minimize us, but in this situation, we did minimize our role because we said, look, we're a pass-through entity for the money. We set policy, we set parameters, but when it comes to the Constitution that says that the legislature shall make suitable provisions for education and those funding formula components, we said, we don't set those statutes. We essentially, when the funding comes in, we're a pass-through entity. So hopefully you'll see the humor or the irony in this. That was the greatest work I'd ever done to assist the board not to be in school finance litigation. It's not reported anywhere, but we were successful in avoiding that. At the same time, that just took me out of 10 years plus of litigation. And in previous, Dan Biles is pretty much in many, many reported cases when he was a private practicing attorney, because he was always involved in the school finance litigation. So consequently, it was a success. It was an up and a down at the same time. But we kept the state board out of the Gannon litigation. That's not to say that the board wasn't involved or the agency wasn't involved in giving deposition testimony, assisting the state. They were very, very involved, but not as a party defendant in that lawsuit. So that was in 2009 that came up, and then the Gannon lawsuit was filed in 2010, and that went on, as we've talked about, for a number of years. So in an effort to wrap up and tie it in, I did send you a copy of the most recent order issued by the mandate issued by the Kansas Supreme Court last week, which essentially says we're releasing jurisdiction. We're not in the monitoring phase of the school finance litigation anymore. What I thought was, and I know that in the Friday letter and in other sources, you get the newspaper article and the links to that. I circulated to everybody the actual court order mandate, and I thought what was interesting, not expecting you to read it, but it attaches the historical, all of those prior orders from 2016 essentially through yesterday as kind of a compilation of their previous orders. So when it's said at the podium that nobody can explain not only the history but all the formulas and the permeations of school finance, you can see that 366 pages attached to that order from last week is a tortured history to follow and to interpret. But if you ever want a compilation of what occurred, that's really, you can, and I think in anticipation of possibly another round of school finance litigation. I don't know what the claims will be. I don't know who the parties will be, but I'm going to make an effort to kind of go back and look at some of those cases and highlight, where they've been, particularly when I hear the legislative summary where it looks like, some statutes might want to shift the burden to the state board to not just on the funding, not make suitable provisions for education, but maybe shift, impose setting of or meeting the Rose standards on the board or something like that. It's possible that down the road the state board could be a defendant in school finance litigation. So thank you for your attention and enduring my my little history, and thank you for your approval and extension of the contract. And I'll just end with, if you do have things that you want to have me discuss or report to the board, I'm always open to adding that or visiting with you separately or offline. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Certainly timely with the timing of Gannon. Oh, Betty, is your hand up?
It was, but that's just for when you make the request for future agenda items.
Well, guess what's next, Betty? She's
So do I
anticipating.
get to proceed?
You may proceed. I will accept requests for future agenda items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things I'm kind of interested in would be the pathway that we have for school improvement in the area of math. I know when we talk about at risk and it's reading and math or literacy, and letters is always attached to that. But I don't think I've ever really heard how we specifically address math. I also would like to have some data as it has to do with subgroup performance in that area. Free and reduce, I guess, would capture it all in terms of the performance. I did get a request from a constituent that had a concern that the success in math will lead to success in terms of college, the being able to apply, get in, and graduate. So I'm trying to get an idea of where we are with that. What kinds of things do we have in place to specifically improve that area? Just general information on that.
Thank you. Michelle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would love to hear more information on high-quality instruction. Like Ann had talked about, a specific science book or, that that would be better quality than maybe what's they've seen in some of the schools. So I know they pick the curriculum. We have to set the standards, and they pick the curriculum to teach to those standards. So I'm just trying to get an idea of, show us the difference between what you consider to be high quality instruction and why we would not have high quality instruction in our schools in Kansas anyway. So they're probably thinking, well, we have high quality instruction. So I guess I just want to see, I'd love to see a presentation or show me examples of high quality instruction. And then if there's time, maybe another time to talk about the psychometrics and how that's being used on assessments. Give me an example of what that means, and so that, you know, the community parents have a better understanding of that as well.
Can I ask you exactly what you mean by psychometrics?
Yeah, that's what I'd like to know. That's what everybody would like to know. That's what's being used on assessments. So it was brought up last month.
Yeah, it's that they were talking about the science of measuring is what it is. Like, do you know your?
Yes, we can
You just
do
want to
that.
better understand, okay.
I do. I think it needs to be, because, you know, even a couple years ago, we had more in-depth with our math standards. They talked about that. Dr. Kingston talked about that, and I just want it in-depth. It's more psychology. Psychology is what it is. So I just want to know, as far as like as a parent, what I expect out of that. I see results, but I may not see, well, what were they asked? What were they asked specifically on that assessment to get to show proficiency or achievement when they're talking about psychology on an assessment, and what that might entail. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other future agenda items? I'll go Jim Porter and then Betty.
These both related to legislation, and they may be off base. But whenever people come here and make presentations to us, we treat them with a degree of respect, whether we agree with them or not. The people that represent us in some areas at the legislature are not treated that way. And I think that we at least need to have the discussion whether or not we should allow people to be mistreated that represent us. The second thing, there, at least based on our discussion yesterday, there are bills that deal with licensure, there are bills that deal with accreditation, both of which are clearly within what Mark tells us is the bullseye. And at some point, we're going to I believe we're going to need to discuss whether or not we're even going to implement laws that are contrary to our vision, that are our responsibility, and then discuss maybe with our attorney what the consequences are at that point.
Thank you, Jim. Betty?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This may or may not be the appropriate time for this request, and if so, I apologize up front.
Is it a
But is
future
there any
agenda
kind
item?
of way we can track when a request is being made and that presentation is on the agenda to indicate what it's in response to?
So I guess my answer to that would be that I generally take notes throughout the meeting. I think we probably all take notes. Deborah writes down the agenda item requests as well. And then Vice Chair Porter and I review those because we can never make it to all of them.
No. I think I'm being
Am I not
misunderstood. What I'm
following?
saying is when an item is actually placed on the agenda, to identify this is in response to
Okay, I hear you.
a request. Yeah.
So we can do a better
that's what
job of calling that out. Okay,
Yeah,
duly
that's
noted.
what I meant.
Got it.
Not when it's put on
Yep.
there. So.
Yeah, we are having a presentation on X because Betty asked for it at the November meeting. Got it. Okay, understood. Thank you. Kathy?
Yeah, and even if it's just not verbally said maybe, but for our information on the agenda, just stated, this is because of this. Okay. We had so much fun with the breakfast this morning with the SEAC. I and Melanie were actually talking about we'd like more time, so I always think we were talking about maybe we could do a long lunch with them sometime when it would work for them to be more of them here, but have that little bit of an extended time to really sit and visit with them more, have a little more interaction with them. And then I just wanted to touch on, if I could, what Mr. Porter said about the legislation on the teacher licensure specifically. wouldn't that actually be considered unconstitutional, since in the Constitution it says that is our role as the board? Right, so to say, like, but that's truly a constitutional issue would be what comes to me. So just wondering if that's not part of that conversation.
I think we need to understand what it's gonna look like if we refuse to do something and we get sued.
Yeah.
Because that's a possible response, and that's something that we'd ask Mark to tell us, what our vulnerabilities are. I spent years as the superintendent ignoring lawyers, but I at least want to know what my options are before I do that.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider too is the things that Mark and Scott have sent is that it's not that the legislature can't diddle in our end of the pool, but it has to be in harmony with things we have done and not in derogation of things we've done. So if they would pass a licensure bill that tries to undo something we've already done, I think we'd have a good case. But like right now, we're negotiating things, so you kind of have to wait to see if it passes and what it looks like, and then we can decide if we're gonna do it or not do it. But it's a good conversation we ought to have, I think.
Dina?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with the ideas that we probably need to have discussions about some of the things we consider to be in our constitutional purview and seem to be things that the legislature wants to not only have input into, they want to run it the way they want it. So, and oftentimes they don't have the information we do and the ability to vet the ideas that they come up with. So anyway, I definitely would support that thought as well. The reason that I actually logged on to this was to say, I've heard a lot about kind of like people talking conversations on the sidelines, so to speak, about what's happening in relationship to mental health. And I'd like to know a little more about what we're doing with anything, any programs, whatever that we've promoted that maybe are happening in the department that we're not aware of, or that we're partnering with other organizations, departments that I think it'd be helpful to know when I've had some parents say something to me also, and I feel like I really don't know as much as I should about what occurs in districts and what we're assisting districts with in that regard. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Check the hand raise app one more time. Anybody else? Jim?
Not right away, but in the near future, a demographic report on the state and projections of where our populations are growing and not.
Okay. I think I see where you're going with that. Thank you. If that is all, Our next meeting is March 12th and 13th. We start on Tuesday and hopefully finish on Wednesday. So I will see you all then. We are adjourned.